Okay, I think with Bob online, we have a quorum. So Piper, if you're ready.
Ready.
Okay, welcome everybody. This is the regular HARC meeting of Wednesday, October 18th, 2023 at 5:30 p.m. at Rebecca Hall. It is a hybrid meeting. And tonight's phone number, if you are joining by phone, is 301-715-8592. Meeting ID is 892-8179-5500. And the passcode tonight is 164444. So as a reminder to everybody or those new joining us, the purpose of HARC is to preserve, maintain, and enhance the historic character, scale, architectural integrity, and cultural resources of the town and the Telluride Historic Landmark District. We'll officially call the meeting to order. I see nobody from town council. From staff, we have Jonna, Erica, and Piper. Is there anybody else from staff out in the audience?
Nope.
Okay,
James will be here later.
okay. Hopefully not too much later. So we'll do our board roll call, and Kieran, go ahead, start it off.
Kieran Landon.
Matt Lee.
Stacy Lake.
Andrew Williamson.
Mark Shambaugh. And Bob? Bob, are you unmuted?
I've asked him to unmute. Bob's with us via Zoom.
Okay, so do we have a motion for approval of the HARC meeting minutes of September 20th?
I'll make a motion to approve, Mark. I'll second.
Okay, Kieran, so
Kieran, yes.
Matt, yes.
Stacy, yes.
If Bob.
What?
Andrew, yes.
Mark, yes. Okay, and Mark Shambaugh will move to approve the chair meeting minutes of September 22nd, 2023. And then we had our special meeting on the design guidelines with Matt, Bob, and Mark and staff. So really it just acknowledged it. Do you still want a motion to say that we had it, Jonna?
I think you can approve them. We have a quorum at those meetings, so I would have the board approve them. And it doesn't mean you were there, it just means you acknowledge that it happened. That's it.
Okay, yeah, because we're gonna go through them tonight. So do we have a motion for September 21st approval and then October 4th?
I'll make a motion to approve both.
I'll second.
Okay, let's vote, Kieran.
Kieran, yes.
Matt, yes.
Mark, yes.
Everybody can vote.
Yeah, you're right.
Oh.
Just acknowledging that
Yeah.
you.
Stacy, yes.
Andrew, yes.
Great, thank you.
Okay, and we'll get to it probably next, but I just want to commend Matt and Bob and staff. We made some great headway. You'll see 3 sections. We have one other one finished, but we'll catch up on 3 more of them next time. And Jonna, with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thanks, Mark. I have a review under board and staff discussion at the end of the meeting, where we can go over the red lines, and a couple of other announcements I'll make at that time. It's not necessary to make them now. So I can share the public process slide right now if you'd like, Mark.
Okay, sure. Okay, to remind everybody, the HARC process starts with the HARC chair introducing the project, then staff gives the presentation and answers any board questions. The applicant gives their presentation. We ask to be 30 minutes or less, and then answers HARC questions. The public will be invited to make comments on the specific project. We ask for 3 minutes or less from the public, and there is no dialogue allowed between the public and the applicants and HARC members. The applicant may address any comments made by the public, then public comment ends, and then the applicant may rebut any comments made by the public, and then HARC members will deliberate and vote. So that's the process, and we have 2 work session items. Well, first of all, any other announcements? I guess you don't have any other announcements till the end, I guess. We'll go there.
Right.
So non-agenda items, do we have any public comment on non-agenda items tonight? Okay, seeing none. Do we have any people in the audience? I can't see.
We do, yes.
Okay, all right. So hearing or seeing none, we'll proceed with the first of our 2 work sessions. And the project title is the Canyonlands and Tower House Work Session. It's a consideration of an application for a work session for new construction pursuant to Land Use Code 5201C. Legal description is Lot 3, Block 1, Canyonlands subdivision to the town of Telluride according to the plat book 1, page 168, and lots 31 and 32 Bachman Village, West Telluride, West Unit Tower House condos, and lot 33 Bachman Village subdivision, West Telluride. Address is Tower House, for the Tower House is 650 to 654 West Colorado. Canyonlands to be determined. The zone district is accommodations 2. Owners are the Tower House Block 23 Housing Corp., a Colorado nonprofit corp, and Canyonlands Town of Telluride. Applicant Norris Design and staff member Jonna Wenzel. Jonna?
Thank you. We received a written public comment from Sherry and Sandy Gourlay earlier this week, which I sent out via email. Has everyone had a chance to review those comments?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, then I will proceed. So this is a combined work session for both sites, which are designated to become affordable housing, the Tower House and Canyonlands. Both sites are on the south side of Colorado Avenue. The Tower House is called the Tower House site because of the existing condominium structure on the site, which was built around 1982. The Canyonlands site is currently a parking lot and staging area adjacent to Clark's Market and the village leasehold and Telluride Lodge to the south. Both sites are in the accommodations 2 zone district and the accommodations treatment area. A total of 5 new buildings comprise the future development on both lots. There are 2 proposed on Canyonlands, and the east and the west building, they're being called right now. And then 3 buildings are proposed on the Tower House site, the west building, the east building, and the south building. The south building is proposed to be 3 free market townhouses. When these are submitted for formal review to you, we are expecting to have an application and plans for each building and then one for the demolition. So it'll be presented differently than it will be tonight, but this is kind of to be concise and general overview of the project at this point. The streetscape shows the context of this block and the mass and scale in relation to the existing structures facing Colorado Avenue, and just gives you a general orientation of where the new structures would be. So if you can see my cursor, there's Clark's at the very right, and then the village leasehold in Clark's. Canyonlands is proposed next to that. There's a duplex between Canyonlands, and then finally the Tower House at the west end. I'm sorry, at the east end. At the Planning and Zoning Commission next week, P&Z will consider an application for a conceptual PUD for both of these sites, which would reduce the minimum lot size for the free market townhouses, which would reduce the minimum, it's proposed that each townhouse would sit on its own lot. The PUD would also increase the maximum site coverage from 40% to 60%, and the maximum height would increase from 35 feet to 40 feet. And the on-site parking requirements would be reduced, with some spaces proposed on Colorado Avenue. A portion of the Colorado Avenue right-of-way may be vacated to allow greater developable area. The right-of-way that's proposed to be vacated is shown in blue here, and the on-site parking is within the red boxes. HARC won't have any formal review of the PUD or right-of-way vacation. But the variations are reflected in the conceptual plans that you're looking at tonight. And HARC may want to comment on the proposed setbacks or siting of the buildings, which would be affected by that right of way either being vacated or not. I wanted to mention that the timeline would be that after tonight's work session, like I mentioned, the conceptual PUD will be reviewed at P&Z next week. And then we're anticipating HARC preliminary review with story polls and a site walk on the December 13th agenda. And then we'll see where it goes from there. But as I mentioned, there'll be 6 separate applications to review at that December meeting. So tonight, HARC is asked to provide feedback on the mass, scale, placement, and character of the new structures and how the proposals at this stage adhere to the design guidelines. I'll remind everyone that no decisions are made at a work session. HARC's review at the work session does not vest the applicant or the public with any certainty as to the outcome of the formal review process. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. I know James and Lance are here with us, and then we have representatives of the applicant team also on Zoom.
Okay, any questions for Jonna this time? Okay, I think your highlights of the appropriate design guidelines and how they might apply were very clear. And so thank you for writing that up. So let's hear from the applicant. If you'd come up and read your name into the mic. And
They
we'll
may
get
be
started.
on Zoom, but it looks like Garrett's unmuted.
Lindsay, go ahead.
Everybody's on. Great.
Yeah, hi, good night. Good night. Good evening. I'm Lindsay. I'm going to share my screen. We have prepared a presentation for you. So I'm Lindsay Newman with Norris Design, and we're really excited to be here tonight sharing the Tower House in Canyonlands affordable housing community with you. Norris Design are landscape architects, planners, and placemakers, and we have partnered here with Servitas as the developer, Dot Architecture, and we have Kimley Horn as our civil engineer. So we have a variety of goals that we're working on with this project. We just wanted to give you a little overview. We're developing this project through a really innovative public-private partnership to deliver much-needed housing to downtown Telluride. The town of Telluride in Block 23 will be conveying the property to Servitas to develop this site for affordable housing. Development of Tower House in Canyonlands was a key part of Town Council's 2023 goals and objectives. And we're moving this initiative forward through the creation of 40 residential units within the downtown core, 29 affordable rental condos on Canyonlands site, and 8 affordable for sale condos on the Tower House site. We have an additional 3 market rate homes that were mentioned for a total of 37 affordable and 3 market rate. Also wanted to mention that we have held a couple community meetings to discuss the affordable housing neighborhood this past summer. We had one on June 29th and another on August 3rd. So we just went through where we're located. This is a little bit of a zoomed out version. North is up on this map. Colorado Avenue is located right here, and we're just to the south on these 2 sites highlighted in pink. We have in yellow some walkability circles just to show how this site is contextually located within the town. The darker yellow is a 1/4 mile, which is about a 5-minute walk. And then the lighter yellow is a 1/2 mile, which is about a 10-minute walk. In terms of zoning, both sites are located within the Accommodations 2 zone district, which allows for housing for residents with higher densities permitted. We will be following the zone district standards with the few requests to increase dimensional limitations and the conceptual PUD application that Jonna noted, which we have submitted. So we are targeting that planning and zoning hearing at the end of the month. We're going to zoom in a little bit here and look at some of the context. When we look at the context of the town of Telluride, we want to have similar scale buildings. We want to replicate the historic grid while offering some diversity and setback along Colorado Avenue and maintaining some landscape space at the streetscape. So we are proposing to vacate a portion of right-of-way along Colorado Avenue. And this graphic is showing how the proposed setback from the existing sidewalk is basically in alignment with or further back than many of the surrounding buildings. We have blue lines that show the sidewalk edge on the south and then the edge of pavement on the north. And then the red dashed line represents a 20-foot offset from the back of the curb. So we can see which buildings overlap quite a bit with this line. Those are highlighted in red, and some anomalies like Clark's. And then we also have the home that's situated between our two lots. This design intends to restore a more consistent historic streetscape along Colorado Avenue while providing sidewalk connectivity. So right here with the star, we're showing where the sidewalk currently actually dead ends along the streetscape. And there's an image of that here. So we're hoping to provide better connectivity along the streetscape and the on-street parking. Moving those buildings towards the street also offers an opportunity to preserve some of the views from Clark's to the west. And really the reason we're asking to vacate this right of way is to meet some of the programmatic requirements that were developed by the town initially for these sites and to maximize the delivery of affordable housing. I'll briefly go over the existing conditions. Jonna, thanks for all the detail on your presentation. So Canyonlands is a vacant lot. It's approximately 1/3 of an acre. And we just wanted to note how much lower in grade it is than Colorado Avenue, as you can see in this photo here. And then Tower House does incorporate 3 lots for approximately 0.2 acres. And we do have an existing 3,600 square foot duplex that was built in the 80s that's intended to be demolished with this site plan. And here is a look at our site plan. One of our goals was to really activate the streetscape here. So we have front porches along Colorado Avenue with sidewalks to people's front doors and then a landscape garden bed in front of all of the homes. We do have 5 separate buildings to break up that overall mass and scale. And we have pedestrian connectivity as shown with the letter B and then also the letter D. So the letter D shows sidewalk alignment along Colorado Avenue. And then the letter B shows some of our pedestrian connectivity within our site. So we have sidewalks that will bring our residents from the parking to the front, and then another one here as noted in the B. And then there's also an existing social trail that connects from south of our site through, and a lot of people use that to shortcut to Clark's. So we thought it would be good to maintain that connection with a soft surface path along the eastern side of building that's right here, this eastern building. And then on the Tower House site, similarly, we are showing the sidewalks with the D. So we have a sidewalk added onto Tomboy right here. And then additionally, we have some sidewalks that would connect east to west through our site. And then people would come around from the parking at the rear and come up through this sidewalk. And we'll go into each site in a little bit more detail than that. Another thing I wanted to point out is just a zoomed in version of where the property line we're proposing is for each site in red, and then the existing right of way, as you can see here in gray. So here is a zoomed in version on Canyonlands. So our access is remaining in basically the same location that it is right now. We have the 2 buildings proposed. The building on the west will provide 21 units with a mix of studios and 2 bedrooms. And then the building on the east will provide 8 units with a mix of studios, 1 bedrooms, and 2 bedrooms. So by separating the buildings, we feel like we are reinforcing the traditional streetscape. Our goal here is to minimize visually the appearance of the overall mass and scale of the buildings. Both buildings will have some tuck under parking. And then we went over the pedestrian connections for the parking. So our request here is to vacate approximately 2,800 square feet of right-of-way to develop housing and maximize that developable area. On Tower House, we have 8 affordable for-sale condos, which will have front porches and landscape gardens activating that street edge. So the affordable homes would be here in the front. Within the 2 buildings, we have a mix of 1 and 2 bedroom units. And then to the south, we have 3 market rate for-sale townhomes. And those for-sale townhomes will have garages within them. So then the parking that's on the surface would be for the affordable units, and that would be accessed, as I mentioned previously, with that sidewalk around to the front. So we have an internal pedestrian way here. It's kind of like an urban space that would be very similar to this view at the right that shows the rear of the Stronghouse Brew Pub. So creating some space in there for residents to have some plantings, some planters, maybe some bike storage. And with this one, we're requesting to vacate approximately 1,000 square feet of right-of-way. And that's also with the goal of developing housing for the community and maximizing that developable area. And with that, I will turn it over to Dot to go through the architecture in more detail.
Can you hear me now? Okay.
Yes.
Great. Yeah, so we want to show you a little bit of the building massing and elevation. So if you look at the bottom of the screen, you can see the overall elevation of both properties with some context on either end. So the far left side is the east and to the far right side is the west. And essentially, we wanted to create the massing and scale of these buildings to kind of fit in with this part of town. And so if you look to the east and west, you can kind of see how we start to line up with some of those existing building heights and overall massing and scale. There's also some buildings that we'll see in a few images later that are across the street that are also in a very similar scale. And then what we wanted to do was to break down the buildings as much as we could. So that's part of why on Canyonlands, we split the building into two separate buildings with two separate heights. And then on Tower House, we split the building into three separate buildings with slightly lower heights to kind of transition as you head into town, as things naturally start to get to a smaller scale in town. So if you want to go to the next slide, I can jump into
Hey, John, real quickly on that context neighborhood, how much taller is the top of your gable versus the free market space to the east next to, or to the west next to Clark's? How many feet taller is that ridge line versus the ridge?
So we're actually 6 inches under the 40 foot mark. I can get you an exact dimension on that, but if you actually look at the height with the midpoint of the gable, we're roughly the same height. Give me a moment, I can get you that.
The top of that gable is how much higher? It looks like about 6 feet at least.
Yeah, 1 sec, I'm getting the dimension right now.
Okay.
Sorry, bear with me here. Yeah, so to the full top of the gable is actually 10 feet from the flat roof. And
Thank you.
yeah, but the tower portion of the building is about 6 feet taller than our building. So,
Okay, please continue. That's good.
okay, so with Canyonlands, like I mentioned, we're actually, can you go to the next slide, Lindsay? So we're actually 6 inches under the 40 foot max height on this building. And also, if you look at the bottom right elevation, because the street is at a higher elevation, it actually feels and looks more like a 3-story building than a 4-story building. So due to the floodplain, we are limited to 3 stories of residential, and then we use the ground floor for parking and storage. The additional height allows us to add 7 units, which is a 1/3 of the 21 units total. So that's part of why we're going a little bit taller. Our design aims to make the 21 units feel more like 4 3-story townhomes than a larger development. And so the way we do that is by breaking down the mass, by stepping the building back and adding front porches. So you have these semi-private areas as you enter into the buildings. And then we use the balconies to soften the building facade as well. So it really kind of doesn't feel like one building. If you look at the bottom left elevation, you can see how much the building steps back. So if you want to go to the next slide, Lindsay. You can see some context. So to the east of Tower House, this is the building on the corner, and we have a very similar massing and scale to this building. And really what adds to that height is we really want to maintain the pitch of the gable. We want to really keep that within line of your design standards, and so that's kind of where the height's coming from. So then if you want to go to the next slide. So this is Canyonlands East, and this building is actually 9 feet shorter than the 40 foot max. So we're not asking for any additional height on this building. Due to the floodplain, we're limited to 2 stories of residential with the top loft area as well as ground floor parking. This building has 8 units. We looked at the town's traditional meeting hall architecture for kind of our design inspiration on this one. These were kind of simple forms without complex roof articulation. And so we are asking for a little bit of relief on the ridge line length. And then if you look at the bottom right elevation, the front of this building really feels more like a single family home from Colorado Avenue. And keeping that simpler roof form really helps add to that feel of being more of a single family residence. If you want to go to the next slide, there's an example of a similar kind of form that we were inspired by in town. And if you want to go to the next slide. So then we get on to the Tower House site. And again, this is a mix of condos and townhomes. And this is where we really wanted to break up the scale as you headed down Colorado Avenue towards downtown. This one is 3.5 feet under the max 40-foot max. The north building has 8 units, and what we wanted to make it feel like, again, was this kind of townhome feel where we create this repetitive pattern. And it's the bottom right elevation. And we pulled a lot of design cues from other parts of town to really make it kind of blend into its new home. So with this, we also stepped back those elevations and then added those porches as well to help soften that front facade, and used, like I say, some local detailing to get us there. And then if we go around to the back of the building on the south side, which is the bottom left elevation, these are the 3 townhomes. And we did similar facade treatments and also stepped those facades back as well. So those residents will have outdoor space as well as their garage parking and their uncovered entryways. And then if we go to the last slide, sorry, here's the context. So on the bottom left is actually a building that's right across the street from this site. And you can see similar massing to this. And we really wanted to reinforce some of the window shapes and balcony and porch shapes that we find other places in town. And so these are just some really great examples of what inspired us while we were working through our designs. And then if you want to go to the last slide, this is kind of a quick overview of materials, but really what it gets down to is we plan to use durable materials throughout the entire project that relate back to traditional uses within the town. So with that, are there any questions?
Okay, we'll see who on the board has questions. I
Mark,
can't.
I have a couple, if you're ready.
Yes, I think, go ahead, Stacy.
My first question has to do with the materials. You specified a local brick. I'm curious as to what that is.
So these are all very early, where we haven't made a final selection, but we would be kind of mimicking some of the brick throughout town.
Okay. And then my other question is the setbacks, specifically the Canyonland buildings at each of those 3 corners to, I guess, the proposed property line. Could you quickly give me those? It doesn't have to be to the inch, roughly.
Lindsay, do you want to jump back to that floor plan so we can kind of get a better sense of which, is it just the west Canyonlands setback you want?
Correct, yeah,
I believe we're at 5 feet.
at each corner.
Well, let me get that for you right now.
5 feet sounds about like what I saw, but you
It's
can
kind
never
of a
trust the
minimum.
scale.
It's a minimum of 5 feet across that. It's mainly for fire. There's no required setback, but we did it to increase the number of windows that we have at the lot line.
Those are my only two.
John, I think, and we have a public letter where, although I don't know the author, they did a lot of research with reference to the guidelines. When you met with staff, and I think in general, there's quite a lot of things to talk about here, even with just mass and scale tonight on both projects, so to speak. But in general, there's probably less deviation, although I think, let me put it a different way. I think it's easier to come in conformance with the guidelines with the tower homes. While other people are thinking of questions, maybe you can, I'm sorry, I'm not there, but you can be thinking about that if that's true. But particularly on canyon lands with the huge mass, when you met and reviewed the guidelines for mass and scale, articulation, setbacks, open space, and all the comments Johnny has here, did you have any discussion about, and I'll look particularly at the Canyonlands elevation, you know, facing Colorado to the north, with respect to complying with those, as this has a, you know, relatively straight wall plane and it's 10 feet taller than the adjacent building, which has a lot to do with context of the neighborhood, et cetera. But I mean, did you discuss these guidelines with staff?
We did. We actually meet all the guidelines as they're written. We do step the building back in elevation. It's a little deceiving just because of of being a flat elevation. But if you look at the side elevations, there's quite a bit of step back for each building. Let me just measure. So for between the middle section of the building, so basically between the two gables, that steps back 10 feet from the front facade of the far right side of the building. So if you're looking at the bottom right elevation, the far right mass of that building is kind of where the building starts at the street, and then it steps back 10 feet, and then it steps back again at the other gable end, and it steps back an additional 6 feet. So in total, you know, we're at 16 feet from one end of the building to the other step back, which you can see pretty clearly there on the left, bottom left elevation. And when we look at articulation, that's really how we've interpreted it, stepping the building back, breaking the mass down into these kind of individual building masses, which really, again, kind of make it feel like a 3-story town hall with a little porch that's raised up because of the height difference on Colorado Avenue, which really helps us out versus it being a full 4-story mass overall.
Did you consider using a basement to relieve some of this pressure with mass and scale for parking?
So we are doing tuck under parking under the building, and it is a partial basement. If you again look at that elevation at the bottom left, we almost have, you know, a walkout basement at the bottom. So we are utilizing the lot as much as we can on that end. One of the issues is the floodplain, and so we do want to keep the building kind of in that kind of happy medium. So we don't want to go too deep, or else we'll be kind of getting towards the water table, and we need to deal with some site drainage underneath the lot as well, and storage of that water. So those are things that we're taking into consideration as we site the building.
Well, the reason I ask is that there's a lot of mass, even with some step back from west to east, a lot of mass and volume and not much articulation between, or making it look like separate buildings per the guidelines. But it would take a lot of pressure off if you just use raft foundations and put in, like many projects do in town, and put in an underground parking rather than ground level. It would take a lot of pressure off the design, and I think you'd have a lot more flexibility. So we'll see what other members say, but that's my first instinct is, why didn't you do that? You know, and take some of the pressure off.
Yeah, we can get with civil, and we can take a look at, see what those implications would be. You know, another part of this, you know, is this is bringing quite a bit of affordable housing to the town, and you know, starting to get into these more complex foundations. do start to add quite a bit of cost, which then impacts the overall affordability of the project. And so those are one of the things that we would weigh with that change to the foundation.
Right, and not to be flippant, but respectful, our job is to adjudicate the guidelines, not necessarily, although I'm empathetic with it, the cost per unit. But I think that really would help if you'd consider it. And like many people, myself included, been involved in projects, use raft foundations. It would take this pressure off the height and give you a lot more flexibility. Is the PUD, I'm sorry, I missed it, to be discussed with P&Z final, is that PUD approved at 40 foot now, or is that what the next meeting's about? I'm sorry, I missed that.
Mark, that'll be discussed, the conceptual PUD will be discussed at P&Z next Thursday.
All right, conceptual, okay. And John, just so you know, and I was involved in rewriting this together with P&Z, 40 feet does not mean that the entire roof line can be at 40 feet. It just means as determined by HARC, some sections may be. And in the past, it's been like elevator shafts or maybe some particular part of a building, but I think that's noteworthy. That was about 2 years ago that we passed that unanimously. So it's not a free leash to do a 40-foot tall building. It is not.
Right, and we respect that. I think that, you know, obviously with this, the topography of this site, this building is the tallest out of the grouping of buildings. We did still come in about 6 inches under. But I know working with staff, one of the important things to stick with the guidelines was the roof pitches. And, you know, it kind of puts you between these two competing elements, the height and the roof pitch. And so we were able to maintain your design guideline roof pitch of the 8 and 12 minimum and still come in 6 inches underneath your height limitations. But yeah, we'll work on lowering that and see where we can land. Yeah,
like I said, the basement parking with raft foundations, which is not, you know, it's maybe $500,000, whatever, is very helpful to take that pressure off of you, because we want to get you into compliance like everybody else as fast as we can here. But I think that's a major consideration that you're facing. So, okay. But I'll let other people comment. And yeah.
Mark, I do have one other question that I had written down here, but I forgot. John, which ridge do you consider to be the primary ridge?
So we took the measurements of the worst case scenario to get to our height. And so it's that main longer ridge that you see in the front of the building.
The east-west ridge.
Yeah, the east-west. So there's other roofs that, you know, the hip roofs off the back are obviously lower and pitch, and that was to help break up the ridge length of that part of the building. And so those are obviously a little bit lower, but we were looking at kind of the worst case with the average grade, which we also took as the worst case. So.
Can you hear me, Mark?
Yes, Bob, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. I think the thing that hits me here on this, particularly on the Colorado elevation, is that long. I don't know if I have a video on this computer, so I don't think so. Just asked me to show myself. I think the problem I have with this is that long ridge down the middle of the building, I think if that could articulate with the setbacks, so it reads, right now it just reads as one long roof. And I think if you had something, I'm not sure how to do it, but I think if that roof was articulated in a way that broke it up a little bit more than just having the two gables at the ends, I think that would help alleviate some of that, you know, huge mass feeling of the building. I know there's setbacks, but when you look at it in these elevations, you don't really see that. So I just think that maybe there could be, take a look at further articulation of the main roof of the building. Where the other building, it's broken up in much more in smaller pieces. And perhaps there's a way to break this up, because right now it just feels like a huge 3-story apartment building.
Yeah, and Lindsay, can you go to the last slide? We do work with the color, and we wanted to keep this a little more simple, but we do work with the color quite a bit on this to break up that mass visually, which I think does help, but we can look at that roof line and see if there's ways we can add more articulation to that. And I do believe we did we had 3 gables in the beginning, but it did feel really repetitive. And then we kind of went towards this direction, but we'd be happy to look at that and see if there's a way to make that feel less massive in the center.
Well, like when you look at the building on this drawing to the left, the new building that's replacing the other building, you've got different treatments of the roof, I think, where you have like a hip on one side and the other side are 2 gables. You have a gable and a hip, I think, and then you have 2 gables on the other side. So it just breaks down that and articulates that mass a little better.
Okay. Yeah, we can look into that. I think the buildings on the far west, the tower house, those are actually 4 front-facing gables, and then they have that large cricket in the center to help shed the snow.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the Canyonland site would start to look pretty similar to that, which we can do. We're trying to create a little bit of diversity through the elevations, but we're happy to add a gable in the middle and try to articulate it a little bit more.
Yeah. The other point I have is on the building on the left, and I'm sorry, I don't remember names very well. But I think you should look at the placement of the windows more traditionally. When you look at the buildings that you referenced as influence, you can see that the windows are much more aligned vertically as well as horizontally. And just take a look at that as well. Oh, there I am.
Yep, we can do that.
And you're looking good, Bob.
Thank you. Thank you. It's hot here today.
Okay, other members, and again, this is, first of all, I commend you, John, for doing the work session, because this will summarize at the end, although Donna has a lot of bullet points, and I think the public letter from a resident must have done a lot of studying, had a lot of good points that we can help you, get to a better place in the first submittal. So thank you for doing the work session. Let's hear from other members. Go ahead and just speak out if you'd like to.
This is Matt. I'll jump in. So I agree with sort of everything that Bob has said about the roof of the Canyon House. I think to me that's sort of the primary offender as far as the mass and scale. I'm having a hard time seeing how this building relates to anything in Telluride other than Boomerang Lodge, which I don't think we're trying to replicate. It seems like a project that could be anywhere in the country. So I would encourage you to, you reference some good neighboring buildings that have characteristics that step down the mass and scale to 1- and 2-story elements, things that would break up the 3-story facades. I don't see any articulation other than the decks and the columns for that. I think the roof forms, again, especially the little hips, tie them all together, make it seem like one massive roof. Now, this elevation, as you described, doesn't do you any favors, but I would look at trying to be more contextual with the modules and proportions and relationships of other projects and historic projects in Telluride, and not look to, say, Boomerang Lodge behind you. A few other comments. I know you guys are probably fast into this and quick, but if we had more imagery that showed the context in your neighborhood that had perspective views down the street. I think those tools would allow you to say de-emphasize the routes, more seeing from pedestrian view, and give us more context. I don't think we have a say in what you're going to get approved by the PUD, and I guess, you know, personally, I think your variation request can work fine, but it would be good to see more context other than sort of the Clark's complex, to understand how this massing fits within your neighborhood and the streetscape as you're coming and entering into town.
I agree.
Yeah, I think this is primary to the Canyons project. I think the other buildings you're much more successful with, but I think they could all learn from just looking around town a little bit more. And you know, this is always a battle in the game to try to keep as many units as possible. I think you're going to find to make HARC comfortable on the Canyons project, you're probably going to have to use or lose some units or reduce the size of some, especially in that third story.
Anything else, Matt?
I think that's kind of my broad stroke.
Anybody else with comments? And again, I want to summarize at the end, John, so we can be more helpful. If anybody else has any other comments.
Mark, I just wanted to be clear, we sort of loosely transitioned there from questions for the applicant into discussion. I know it's a work session, so it's looser, but
yeah,
we're full on discussing. I'll go again. I think, like others have said, the number one issue, especially with the Canyonlands portion, are the historic proportions of height, width, and depth. There are numerous, without listing and reciting all the guidelines, there are quite a few guidelines that talk about the historic proportion. I understand this is in accommodations, and there are other factors in play, namely the crisis of our time, which is affordable housing. But I see, especially with the Canyonlands project, the mass and scale is wholly incompatible with traditional mass and scale. It just, I mean, I don't even think that's objective on my part. I think that's an objective assessment. And then, like Matt indicated, I know we're not, as HARC members, allowed to discuss the right-of-way vacation. But one thing that wasn't highlighted in the staff memo was the introduction in the accommodations guidelines, accommodation section of the guidelines. Specifically, there's a subsection called out the Colorado Avenue corridor, and it in part says substantial landscaping should evolve in order to extend a green corridor from the town boundary to the historic district. Vacating that right of way diminishes that green corridor, especially since the large cottonwoods and other mature vegetation in that area are going to be removed, and there's simply nowhere to put anything back that's similar. If you look immediately to the north, now this is of course benefited by the bike path that's there and the larger setback. There is, I would say, substantial landscaping to the north. I don't necessarily, again, this is a conceptual work session. I'm not sure I see that on the south, especially at the Canyon events in this project. Maybe it'll be there, but without any sort of 3D representation or any sort of detailed drawings of that, it's difficult for me to say. There are other guidelines that I think specifically speak in opposition to the right of way. AC2A talks about projects respecting traditional context of the community and the accommodations treatment area. I would say that that particular curve in Colorado Avenue is contextual. Shrinking that corridor, which is already sees quite a lot of traffic as the main entrance to town. I don't see how that benefits that relationship or that site context. 6A speaks to pedestrian scale. As you know, the currently the sidewalk that you're proposing to extend is not used as such. It's a buffer to parallel parking spots. The sidewalk that's used is going to be removed as part of this vacation. It's going to push pedestrians literally onto the shoulder of the busiest street in town. I don't know that that's a positive outcome with regards to AC6. AC8 views. This was brought up briefly as one's leaving town headed to the west. The western facade of the east building of the Canyonlands will be prominent with very little articulation. Certainly any views to the west are impacted. Not that they're necessarily protected through a property, but that will be a result. And not to belabor the point, but 16A building setbacks, and this is why I asked the question about the setbacks. The setbacks actually don't vary. They're 5 feet, 5 feet, 5 feet, and 5 feet. They benefit from a curvature in the road to provide some setback, but setbacks to the actual property line don't vary. Further, so to move on, we've had multiple discussions on the HARC board about balconies and decks not necessarily being sufficient to satisfy the requirement for stepping down. I didn't write a guideline section after that one, but it's right here. It's 6E1. A building should step down in scale. It does then go on, of course, to speak about decks, porches, bays, and balconies. And I think that's one reason why the Tower House project is perhaps more successful, because there are some roofs which give a bit more mass and a bit more stepping, a bit more articulation that isn't present on the Canyonlands project. And the other question I asked was about the primary ridge line. AC5C.2 speaks to the primary ridge line. I don't want to misquote it or yeah, it speaks to it being perpendicular to the street, which clearly that ridge line is not. There are 2 perpendicular ridge lines on each end of the building, but the primary one is not. And it's so long, right? It's so apparent. I think on the Tower House project, it's a very similar condition where that's acting as a cricket, which is required for drainage. But on the Canyonlands project, it's again very pronounced. And then the only other section that I want to go to right now, although I think staff did a great job of putting in bold all the areas that need to be reviewed, focused on. Without reading through all those, I will say though, I highlighted all the sections in my guidelines, and my highlighter ran out of pink towards the end. There's quite a lot of it. AC26 roof form speaks to pitches on primary structures typically being 12-12, although in rare instances somewhere as low as 8-12. On sheds, occasionally roof slopes were as low as 4-12. Well, we're not dealing with sheds in any way, shape, or form here. I think, again, it's going to affect head heights. It's going to affect how much square footage you have on that 3rd level. But I think adhering to a minimum of 412 on major buildings here doesn't necessarily satisfy that requirement or that guideline. I mean, that's what I got.
Okay, thank you. Any other comment? I'm going to try to summarize, which I'd ask everybody to chip in. So we
Yeah,
can
Mark.
give them. Oh, yeah, Kieran.
I can, mention it. I just generally agree with what everyone has been saying here. I think I'd like to really underscore how beneficial introducing 1- and 2-story elements where you do have these 3-story wall planes would be. Anything you can do to just break it down even more, make it more obvious about how it's broken down. to reduce perception of the mass and scale, if not the mass and scale itself. I think more open space throughout both would be wonderful. I think when you align elements like decks in the way that you have straight up vertically, it takes away any of the effect of stepping down. So nothing else, try to alter that so it creates more the appearance of stepping down. Because having those in that direct plane makes it mass and scale, just again, the perception of mass and scale just so much more. Looking at the tower house, I actually think that could benefit more stepping down, even more obvious stepping down. I think the pedestrian pathway between the front set of buildings and the back, pedestrians going in there, that's going to be like a 3-story wall plane directly up. If there was some way to add more visual interest to that as well, ground it better, make it brighter, sunnier. And things like having kind of the foundation material extend higher than the height of a person can also negatively impact the perception of mass and scale. So things like that should probably be looked at as well. That's about it.
Okay, thank you. Before we go to the tower house, I would like to finish with that, trying to get feedback. I'd like to really gather up and summarize and see if we can.
Hey, Mark, Andrew is like to contribute something.
Yes, please.
Not to
Andrew.
keep harping on the mass and scale of everything, but kind of just piggybacking off what Kieran was saying, 12 balconies right there facing Colorado Avenue. I don't believe there's anything else like that in the town, the whole county, maybe not even Montrose. But if you look to the east there at the Mendota building, they really did a great job of concealing those porches. It gives not only the residents some concealment, but it also provides stepping down and also a little bit of privacy so that, when you're driving into town and you're first coming into all these buildings, you're not just seeing a plethora of porches with everyone's personal stuff stacked up on the outside, which is not appealing to anybody. That's kind of my comment. Like I said, everything else Stacy, Matt, and Kieran said, I'm not going to repeat. I think they all did a great job, and hopefully, you guys have some great direction on some of the comments that we've provided.
Thank you, Andrew. So I'm going to summarize because really Jonna summarized the design guidelines in bold letters. When she puts it in bold, it means there's concern that it might not be compliant. So I would ask you to review all bold text in Jonna's memo as a concern also of the board. And I would say in summary, particularly these comments that we've all made fall on 6 pedestrian scale, right? And there's numerous of those, C through G have been commented on here. So 6, 13 open space, 23 mass and scale, which was the primary purpose of this meeting. Hey, John, how wide is the facade right now of Canyonlands? Remind me.
I think they're under 30 feet, aren't they? Each one. The different
3 at 30.
25 to 30 feet.
That's close enough. But again, the ridgeline comment that we talked about appears too long and or needs to be broken up. And that's one thing that you really did take to heart, was setting back, as you started in your summary, 15 feet after to the most western module, and then another 10 feet, I think. That's a start. So 23 mass scale, building form 24, roof form 26. Again, the roof is facing the wrong way. The guidelines are clear. It needs to be perpendicular to the street. 27 architectural character. And in general, I think there's solutions to be found from the following. 1, I'm going to read 12 items or 11 items. 1, underground parking would allow you flexibility to take the pressure off this. It's 10 feet higher. I don't think the towers is relevant than the building adjacent to it at the entrance to town. I believe you're going to find the board believes is excessive, and maybe someone will comment at the P&Z meeting. But just remember that height does not mean the whole building can be whatever height P&Z determines. The length of that ridge line, the orientation of the gables too. 3 relate to the architectural history and tradition. Decks alone are not enough articulation. It needs to be more contextual with more modules, maybe similar to the drift of what you did do at the tower house, which we'll get to in a minute. The right of way, Stacy comments and cited various guidelines, 13D, 16A, setbacks. Again, that's something that P&Z will consider, but and then pedestrian scale. It just doesn't read as pedestrian scale. It's not our opinion. It's just kind of obvious when you look at it. And the building needs a step down with a change of wall plane, not just decks. Another one. The roof slope, as Stacy said, we won't, of course, much of this is at 812, 412s will not fly. And then Kiernan brought up a point where the guidelines talk about 1- and 2-story elements. I mean, this is the guidelines, it's not our opinion. Would help bring this mass and scale down and break it up, no question. So those are some summary comments. To the best I can summarize to the board. Did I leave out anything crucial? Of course, I cited the main guidelines, but any other notion to leave them with before maybe we talk about the tower house a minute?
I think they got plenty to think about.
Okay. So, and gentlemen, I hate to say this, but when you first see this, it's the entrance to town and a block from the historic landmark district. I mean, it looks like it could be an apartment complex near the Denver airport. And you don't want, I know you don't want that, or it wasn't intended. But if the gables are facing the wrong way and the ridge line's too long and it's not stepping back enough with articulation, not just and change of materials to try to break up and make it look like 3 modules, it just doesn't suit Telluride. And we want to help you get there. And so I'm hoping, unless you have any other questions, we'll go on to the tower house, that we've given you some feedback to go work on. Okay.
Mark, I got one other thing. I don't know what's the smaller sort of boarding house shaped building? What's that called?
Canyonlands East.
East. Okay. How long is that ridge line? A bit more than 60 feet?
It is.
Yes.
It's 79'11". That was one of the asks we had to make it feel a little bit more like that meeting house architecture that's found at other places in town.
Now,
For me personally, I appreciate that approach, and this is probably the building I like the best in your design. It's I know you're trying to go to the Elks building, but that's it's a little too long. So I'm wondering if there's a way you could study a ridge, breaking the ridge or dropping in a certain section. I generally kind of like the overall form and the way it's 2 stories and kind of cantilevered on the, not cantilever, but you've got it on post in the back. So something to think about there.
Lindsay, can you jump to that elevation? Because I'd love some feedback on that. We did put a gable on it at one point in the middle, and it felt really awkward. The east building, Lindsay. That one. Yeah. So we did, like I say, we added a gable to the center. There are inhabitable loft spaces in this building. So one of the thoughts was we could raise those shed roofs up, and that would break the ridge line and make it under the 60 feet. And if that's not enough, we could switch those to gables, but I really think it detracts from the overall architecture that kind of fits in with that more traditional Telluride architecture. So if you want to give me some feedback on that, we can implement it.
I mean, I don't know of a situation where we've allowed a ridge to go over 60 or much over 60. I'm wondering if, to me, actually, the dormers detract. I actually like just the pure form. I wonder if you could try to take, whatever's over 60, 15 feet or whatever, and to the front and drop that. That would kind of do two goals. It would start to step down towards the street, lower that mass and scale from the main public viewpoint. I'm not sure if that works with all of your spaces you have in that roof, but that would be an idea.
Yeah, we can look at that. The thing is, we're really trying to provide as much affordable housing as possible, and that we would probably lose a unit. That's why I was debating whether bringing those, like I say, bringing those roofs up higher where they break the top of the ridge line would actually reduce that length by breaking the ridge line. So would that not count towards having a shorter ridge line?
I'm not quite following what you're trying to describe.
So there's
And we don't have to dive into that level of detail. It's kind of for
That's
you
fine.
guys to.
We'll find a solution to it.
Yeah, I don't think any of us will buy into over 60 feet, but this building, as Matt said, I mean, that's the only major thing is to try to break that up. And then the guidelines clearly say step down to the street. So if you can accomplish that, I think this building is much closer, John, to compliance.
We'll take a look at it and see where we can land.
Okay, thank you for
It
that.
would, Mark, it would be nice though, Matt, you mentioned this earlier, to see a view of the northeast corner from Colorado or from the other side of Colorado. I think this east elevation is going to be more prominent than an east elevation would be on a lot that was, where the streets are more orthogonal. I think that northeast corner is going to be a fairly prominent building element, and it's not articulated.
I'll say it again. I think if you guys were to, get a LiDAR scan of the neighborhood, plug it in, take views from perspective of a eye level of a pedestrian, it's going to drastically help your cause. These elevations aren't helping you. And I think the perspectives will help you kind of sell that maybe these roofs aren't as big a deal as they are from a pedestrian scale. So.
Yeah, and we did start some renderings of the overall in 3D, and it does really help break it down. I agree that the flat elevations aren't doing us any favors. So.
Okay, so you have really one comment on the tower or on the east building, and then tower house. We want to summarize who would like to. I mean, we had a couple stray comments, but
Could you go to that drawing, please?
I have a quick comment. So the lower right and the upper right are feeling much better than the rest of the elevations. And I'll point to the lower left, that hip roof to me is sort of tying all of those roofs together, and it's reading as one larger piece. And I realized that I think they're actually stepped back, but it's not reading in the documentation we got. We didn't get a lot of 3D views, and the elevations aren't actually as well rendered as what we're seeing on the screen. So it's hard to gain confidence that the architecture is going to feel good from the documentation that we have.
Yeah, and my sense is that south elevation is actually stepping forward towards the street. It's heavier on top than it is down below. I mean, some of that's a function of the fact that there's no room for any sort of articulation over the garage door, or there's less going on lower. But South Tomboy, or what the Tomboy turns there, is it continuous Tomboy, South Tomboy? At any rate, that's still a street that the guidelines apply to.
I think Bob made the comment too, adjusting the windows to more historic proportions will help you out as well.
do we think there's any articulation of change in wall plane facing the street?
Absolutely. I think the same thing applies. I think they've done a much better job at breaking these up into modules that more relate to the historic fabric. I'll tell you, I don't think the modules are quite right yet, but it's much better than the larger Canyonlands house was.
But the east elevation especially though is still faces a street.
Yeah.
It's not Colorado Avenue, but it's a street nonetheless, and there's not, to me, those facades are very flat.
And it will be very seen. I mean, you'll really see that coming from town, driving west. You'll see that whole side there as you're coming up. So I think that take a look at that in terms of the articulation and the window patterns and the setbacks, I think would help a lot.
John, you showed an image of Mendota across the street here that I think does a really good job of stepping down to 2-story and 1-story forms. And I know you guys are trying to keep as many units as you can, but some articulation will help us get across the finish line.
But it's interesting to me that you included that image. I mean, I understand why you did it. It's across South Tomboy. It's very adjacent, but there's basically one 3-story form. And it's 20% of the facade, and the others is broken up by 1- and 2-story elements. I know it's going to reduce units, but it would be more architecturally compatible with the guidelines.
Okay, so some stepping down to the east and north with articulation, not just decks or something, would lead to compliance or further compliance and elimination of that hip roof. So I think those are the two. And that covers all the buildings. And we look forward to seeing you in December. I know it's a short time frame, but one last ask. Please, if in doubt, because we want this to be as ready as it can be on your December presentation, please listen to and meet with Jonna to review this.
We will.
So you don't go astray and we have a rogue elephant that we have to continue. That's not what we want to do. And we appreciate very much, as I said at the beginning, you're having a work session to smoke some of these things out. It's your first time in Telluride, I guess. And hopefully these are helpful notes. And I know there's a lot of pressure in the program, but we have to make sure that compliant to the guidelines, especially at the gateway to town.
Mark, remind me, is there public comment for work sessions?
Yeah, there can be. In fact, we're going to move to it here and include the public. And because we're not deliberating or anything, I just wanted to summarize, but let's go ahead. I think we've summarized all we can summarize. Let's hear from the public. If you want electronically, raise your hand. I see one of the authors of a letter. I see several other nearby residents, it sounds like. Any other public?
Stories hand raised.
Yes, Ashley, yes, welcome. Just unmute, I guess, and then.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Hi, everyone. Hi, HARC. So I actually live in Telluride Lodge. I'm in that 300 building that's directly behind you guys. I have been listening to, everything, and I've obviously been plugged in with this project. I actually think the comments about including, more visuals of the surrounding areas might help with the size and scale of this project because it is an accommodation zoning. Telluride Lodge, Boomerang, all those, Tomboy, they're all kind of this larger, big condo style buildings. And I don't think that this is actually super far off from those designs. My one comment would be is, if we're looking at the building that's closest to Clark's, the western building of the Canyon view lot, it's interesting to me that, rather than doing something that would extend it back further on that and maybe have that parking be more covered, and that would help bring down the actual height without compromising the number of units, that might be an interesting thing to see rather than have just this large parking lot looming in the back. Another thing, I know that you guys aren't going to deal with this now, and Mark, you made a comment about it, about, doing some sort of underground parking and stuff like that. It's really interesting because I've heard a whole bunch of different stuff about like floodplains and this and that. I will tell you, I know that in Telluride Lodge, any of the lower units here are allowed to dig full-size basements. So I'd be really interesting to see why this project isn't able to do some more stuff underground. Again, it doesn't have to be living space, but, you know, putting parking or putting some of that stuff that's, you know, would be more amenable to being below subterranean, stuff like that, I think would be really interesting. I actually think that the look of the tower house replacements on the front, I think feel more in keeping with the historic look of the town than the current 1980s duplex with the big tower on top. So I actually think that those ones look pretty good. So those are just my comments as a resident that will be living directly behind them in another large green building. So I appreciate all the words here, and thank you guys for doing the work on this committee.
Thank you very much. And underground parking and raft foundations are standard operating procedure for floodplains. It is nothing magical about it. There's a cost premium, obviously, but Sandy Guri, looks like she had a hand up, who was person who wrote the letters. Sandy, can you unmute?
I've asked her to unmute.
Sandy Gurley?
There she is.
Can you hear us?
There you are. Yes,
Oh.
welcome.
Hello.
Did you hear the swear word? Sorry.
We didn't take it personally. It's okay.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Sandy Gorley. You have a letter from us that my wife prepared very carefully. I'm very proud of her. So we live in what's called the Mountain House in these plans, which is between these two projects. We live in Unit A on the west, and our neighbors, the Summers, own the east property. They've actually owned it since 1989, which is pretty cool. So anyway, we also noted the length of the Canyonlands East. In addition to our written comments, which we appreciate you looking at and considering. I'm not going to bore by going through all of those. We also noticed the long roof line of the Canyonlands East building, and it seemed to be inaccurate in the summary of the package. It did say it was 60 feet, which it appears to be longer than. So know that. The second is we didn't notice anything in the plans about the north-south pedestrian route, and we heard earlier about a suggestion that it could be between our property and the Canyonlands property. And, whilst not 100% opposed to that, there may be other alignments. We note that there's only a 5-foot setback, and so that's going to be in the snow shed area. So we're not entirely clear how that works in terms of, and somebody else, one commission member commented about the vertical face and it not being very friendly and inviting. So, if that's serious, then we would suggest that there needs to be more space on that side to allow that to happen. I think, the rest of our comments speak for ourselves. We fully support these affordable housing on these sites. Honestly, we think that the arrangement between the town and the developer, the public-private partnership, which hasn't been mentioned here, is probably, affecting the density, which is contributing to some of the other discussion items. And there's probably ways for that to be, relieved or made more successful. And we hope that happens. Obviously, we live in that 80s house. We own it. We love it. We love the views from it. We recognize that things are going to change, but we hope that it's done in a manner that's best for the neighborhood in the long term, and of course all the citizens of town. So thank you for your consideration, and we look forward to continuing in this process.
All right, very good. Thank you very much. Thanks for your letter. Any other public comment or any in the room? John, I can't see who's in the room.
I think so,
No.
yes. There's a lady here at the desk. Identify yourself, please.
I'm Patty McIntosh, and I also own a unit at Telluride Lodge. So it's right in our backyard, and this project, and just hearing tonight and looking at the material I received, it seems really massive. And I know that we need the housing, but I think we can accomplish this in a a good way for all of us. And my concern is the parking, because what I see, there's about 41 bedrooms-ish in this project, and I only see about 28 parking spots. So, and then what you do have is parking, and I don't know the scale of it, but just like some of the other affordable housing units that have been built, most of those units just use it as storage because they can't get their SUVs in there, their big trucks. So that's a concern of mine. And also the 5-foot setback. It looks like the project comes right up to the north side of Telluride Lodge where we have this funky walkway. And it looks like it actually takes part of that walkway. So I'm just, concerned with how you're handling all this. And I thank you for making it fit into our community, because as HARC's board said, I think you can make it blend a little better into a Victorian village than what you've designed here. So thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Come up to the microphone.
Oh, because I actually have a microphone.
Hi, I'm Matthew Hintermeister. I live at 700 West Colorado, otherwise known as the Clark's Complex. So my biggest concern here, and I also actually co-own all the commercial space in that building on the second floor above Clark's. My biggest concern, besides everything that the HARC board has said, and you guys have brought up a lot of great comments, and I think a couple of you have talked about the right of way, the public right of way. I think blowing into it and getting rid of the sidewalk it is continuous. I walk it every day. And it is very green and very nice. It really hurts this project from the get-go. I mean, I really believe that part all along, and there are parts of every building that go into the right-of-way, should be a non-starter. Quite frankly, when I bought my condo in 2007, I gave that a lot of thought, knowing that the lot next door would be built on and appreciating that. And I thought I could depend on the property line of this lot. And if, I think if we had any other applicant besides the town behind this project, that would have been a non-starter. I don't even know if it would have shown up in a work session. So I think starting there and then adding in all the other comments would help this project a lot. Quite frankly, when I first saw the plan, before I first saw the plans, I was really hoping this would look quite a bit like Mendota. I think Mendota is one of the best projects the town's done. I even, as a realtor, have clients ask me if there's anything available in that building, which tells you they think it looks pretty good. So thank you for your time. Thank you for your service on HARC.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Yes. Hi, my name is Annette Pettit. I'm used to speaking like this. Sorry. I'm a business owner and I rent a big space. What space is it?
She's on the northeast corner of the park.
It's a big, I have it as a big Pilates studio. I've been there for 5 years. I've had a Pilates studio in the town of Telluride for about 30 years. I have about 60 clients a day come in. They prefer to walk. So for me, what I started to notice when I started to see the new sticks go up and then this new diagram come up was that it would wipe out the walkway. And my clients and kids, because I see everything because I have big windows that look at the high school in Colorado.
That is a very important walkway, and it goes to the public bathroom. Kids hang out there. I know that, I think Stacy, you talked about the green space there. A lot of kids come from school, they eat lunch at Clark's. We all know that. But they all sit there, and there's like a pretty little landscape there that they all sit at, and they're well behaved, but that's where they like to sit. That's a big walkway in between this building. I'm sorry, what is it called? The one right beside Clark's, Canyonlands. There's a staircase that comes off the walkway between the bathroom and the new building. And a lot of clients and business owners and people who live at Canyon Lodge, they use that to go into the building, and it comes off that pathway. And then to see the new stakes wipe that out, and then to push the pedestrians, the kids and tourists and everybody choosing to walk instead of drive, they're going to get pushed to, I think, not a safe place closer to the road. And like, I agree that that is not a pathway. That is, there's like maybe 8 spots for people to do a quick 20 to an hour parking there, and they go to the bathroom and they quickly run to Clark's. I know, because I've been, part of that spot there for a while. So that's not a walkway, and it's really close to the road. So to push people up to the road, across, and then back down to the public bathroom through Clark's is really weird. Doesn't seem like that makes sense to do that. Yeah, so that's just one of my comments. Doesn't seem sense, doesn't seem safe, and it's definitely doesn't seem fluid, and it's going to wipe out a lot of the greenery that's there and the pretty trees and landscaping. And then my other comment, I don't know if has been addressed, is I know that there's potentially 29 housing units just in that one spot. And all those cars are going to be coming off onto Main Street, taking lefts and rights. And you cannot, between 3 o'clock and 3:30, 3:45, take a left out of Clark's early. So I don't know how everyone is going to 29 cars, plus if people have more than one car, I don't know what the rules are to that. But I don't see how anyone's coming out of that building alone and trying to take a left or a right onto Main Street onto Colorado, when it's already so congested, and then adding on a very difficult pathway that all of the kids use, and all of the clients for Clark's in that building, and then all of people who are choosing to not drive. It's going to be a huge congestion. And it's already that. I just sit at work watching the congestion during that hour, and in the morning as well, by the way, between 7:45 and 8:30 in the morning. So just an observation and a curiosity of how that's all going to work. And if there's any other options for all those cars coming out of that zone. That's just my thank you. My view.
Thank you, Annette.
Any other public comment? I don't see anyone else in the room, Mark.
Okay, well, it's an informal meeting. Before we close, I just asked the applicant if he wants to comment on anything, particularly the sidewalk and setback right away comments with the current owners, business owners, school kids, pedestrian traffic in the Clark's, and or with the sidewalk and or parking. If the owner, if you choose to, if not, I'm sure you've listened, but I'll give you the last chance to have the last word.
No, I think honestly, it's been a good working session, and I think we're going to address as many of these comments as we can in the next meeting. We've got a lot to chew on, and so I think the best course would be to address those and then come back to you.
Okay, all the best to you. Thank you very much, and good luck.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll do our second work session right away here. It's at 4:36. Excuse me. Get my notes here. It's at 239 North Aspen. It's consideration application for work session for alterations in addition to the existing contributing rated building pursuant to Land Use Code 5201C. Legal description is North 33 and 7/10, Lot 13, Block 41, Town of Telluride, North 42 and 1/2, Lots 36, 37, and 38, Block 3, West Telluride Addition, Block 7, Dakota Addition Telluride, and Lot 1 or Lot 13, Block 7, Dakota Addition. Address is 239 North Aspen. It's in the historic residential district. Harley and Lisa Barnes are the owner, and Narcissus Tudor is the applicant, and staff member Jana Wenzel. Jana?
Thank you. This is another work session to discuss possible addition at 239 North Aspen Street. The property is located at the southwest corner of North Aspen and West Galena, just east of the elementary school. The house and barn at this property are both rated contributing. The house was built in 1905 and is notable for its Dutch colonial style and high level of historic integrity. This style is fairly rare in town. The Sanborn maps show a different house on this site until 1904. We know the house was built in 1905 because it was well documented in the papers at the time. The 1908 Sanborns show a one-story unenclosed back porch on the house. The 1922 Sanborn shows an enclosed two-story porch, but we don't know when that was built or if it was during the period of significance. So we assume the upper bay in the rear is historic, but the lower porch was not. Some of you might recall we did a work session on this property back in 2020. And at that time, we discussed removing both the upper bay and the lower entry porch. At that work session, HARC determined that the second level bay should be preserved as it was constructed during the period of significance, but HARC said that at that time they would consider a one-story addition in place of the existing rear porch. That work session, as this work session does not vest the owners or applicant with any particular outcome. So we're looking at a different proposal tonight, which is the construction of a two-story addition, either at the rear or the southwest corner of the historic house, and the possible repositioning of the garage. In your packet, they're labeled option A and option B, and I know Narcissus will go over both with you. Once again, I'll give you the reminder that the work session doesn't vest the applicant or the public with any certainty about the future outcome of a formal development application. So Narcissus is here with us in person, and before he presents, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
I have a question that I'm not sure you, Narcissus, might have to answer, but just glancing at the Sanborn maps, it looks like the secondary structure, looks like it was, that's the same structure, looks like it was moved on the property at some point.
The secondary structure, you
Yes.
said?
Is that your feeling of that, Jana?
I do recall vaguely talking about that at the last work session, and I think it did appear later. It might have been moved and was expanded at some point after 1908 as well. It's a large accessory structure.
Okay, any other questions? John, I have one. Although it was a work session, so nothing was binding, but that just, and you mentioned it, that secondary, or excuse me, that upper bay, west end that we determined, well, we don't know if it's historic or not. It sure looks like with Dutch revival, they wouldn't have ruined that west elevation with that 4-window bay, but where it stands is we don't really know, correct? Because it's not on the 08 and then it's on 1922, but we don't know if in 1913, if it was built before that or between 13 and 22, correct?
Yeah, no one has found the 1913 Sanborn maps yet, so we go through this with every historic project. You see on the 1908 Sanborn map that there is something back here that looks like a porch. And then it's altered in the 1922. We don't know what happened between those dates, but I did find my notes from the previous work session, and I think HARC at that time believed that the upper level bay, the one with the windows, was constructed and would be preserved, should be preserved.
I'm noticing an echo from your voice.
Yeah.
now. I don't know.
Can I, yeah, I'm trying to mute myself, but I'm not allowed.
Just turn your volume off. Thank you.
Okay, and I may have been in the minority. I clearly remember that was the majority view at an informal work session. But I look at that elevation and I think, who would have done that to a Dutch revival house and ruined that west elevation? But that was just my personal opinion, because none of us know for sure, because like you say,
Well,
you can't.
it was done prior to HARC, probably around between 1908 and 1922. So it's been there a long time, I'm guessing.
Jana, could you go back to the Sanborn maps, all of it again? It looks to me like in the 1908 that you've got the porch. I'm guessing, right frankly here, that the porch that's on the back of the building now, the lower portion, is shown in 1908, and 1922 is showing that element that's up above it.
Yeah, but we don't know when the element above it was constructed,
Yeah. Yeah.
whether it was during the period of significance or after.
Okay. I just, the thing that resonates to me is Dutch revival. I just think
it looks funny.
it ruins the look. I mean, but we won't argue about it. Let's hear from Narcissus and then.
And I think Narcissus has taken that into consideration. So let's hear what he would like feedback.
Okay, go ahead, share your screen, Narcissus.
Great, thank you, guys. Thank you, Jana. All right, so a Dutch colonial house, one of the only ones on a corner lot between Aspen and Galena Avenue. It's a very interesting structure. It's a very unique structure, and I think it has a tremendous amount of character. The purpose of this work session is, prior to coming in with a formal application, I did talk to Jana, and I said, look, I'm looking at two different options here. I would like to get the feel of, what do you guys feel as HARC? What would be allowable? I know there's some precedent. I don't want to necessarily use that. I want to come before you guys, present two options, the merits and the pros and cons of both, and then get your guys' feedback on those. Additionally, I have some minor items that I would like to also get your feedback on, but overall, I don't want to get lost into tiny details and crazy specifics. So without further ado, I'm just going to dive into it quickly. You can see here basically just the overall plat, where the existing structures are, where the shed, which is basically composed of three different components, which sits right past the property line. So you can see here, the shed sits slightly north of the north property line. And then here on the bottom, you're going to see basically 229 North Aspen, which is the house to the south of it. Land use code stuff and specific information I'm not going to go through right now. Basically the Sanborn. So here you have a pretty good idea of how the lots have been developed over the years. And there was an existing structure, which was a main gable with a shed towards the rear of it. And you'll see that in the Sanborns. And then as you start to get to 1908, you'll see the actual, the current structure that was built. 1905 was the actual date of construction. And then you'll see gaps in here of the actual shed as to portions of it. and when those things were constructed. So 1913 being the end of period of significance, but we don't have that Sanborn map, as Jonna mentioned. Going through here in the RGS book, this was great to actually go through with a magnifying glass on this location. It's a great way to actually orient yourself compared to the elementary school. So you'll see here that first house that was actually put up there, the gable with a shed to the rear, and then it continues on. You'll see here the actual Dutch colonial. So there it is. We actually, without the bump out, and then that's on page 125, doesn't have the year outlined. Page 127, you see the bump out added on, and then it continues on through to today. Additionally, what I want to mention to you guys is, as you go through these Sanborn maps and RGS books, all the sheds that were moved, they were basically used as storage trailers, moved from project to project, sometimes were moved and added onto that specific parcel. I'm bringing this up because it's gonna, it'll address a point as I go through this. The rear of the house, so you'll get an idea here of the porch down below, and then the bump out, the pod added to the upper level. I do agree that it does take away from that clear distinction Dutch colonial profile that you actually have on the primary facade of Aspen Street. The side yard here is heavily vegetated. You have a chimney, and the distance between the two houses is actually, it's very hard to see past this house to the back. So basically the front elevation on Aspen Street is fairly pure. It's remained intact, and we plan on obviously preserving it. Moving over to the north elevation, you're going to see basically the dormer, you're going to see the profile of the Dutch colonial, and then you do have, as you move to the west, you're going to see this pod added onto. Moving on to the secondary structures, you have a pretty clear idea of basically access to the garage, and the vehicular parking is off of Galena. Two garage doors, you have a gable here, a cross gable, another smaller gable further to the back, and then almost a flat shed over into this corner. So again, you could tell that over time, these have been added onto for different functional uses. This is the west side of the actual shed, and you can see the distance between the elevation of the sidewalk and the yard as it actually slopes down to that corner. This is basically the southern view of the actual shed. So I think it has a lot of character. I think it's fairly unique. But again, this is basically vertical barnwood. Through it here, utilitarian aspect and utilitarian use to it, with doors that are mismatched, little windows that were up here, probably for access to loft that's been closed in, and then you see another one up here as well. So again, both these structures are rated contributing. We plan on preserving both, and with that, I want to move on to the proposed development. Here, we have an aerial view of the context. So basically, Galena is up above, Aspen Street is to your right. You'll see 229 North Aspen, which is right down below here. This one is another gambrel roof structure, but it's oriented the other way. There's an elevation difference between these two ridges of about 6 feet. The main view out these windows from the primary residence are basically blocked by the width of 229 North Aspen. And then, so even from the upper level, you basically don't have any views. So anything that we do here has to be basically oriented to the north. And if regarding the addition to the rear of the project, that is our hope that we'll get some southern views, also some southern solar exposure. That's really the desirable aspect right now, is to obviously get some sun to come through from the south. We're blocked obviously by this structure down below us. In the Sanborn maps and in the RGS, you'll see it was built after the original structure was here. But again, I believe this was increased its rating just recently. With that, I want to bring up basically option A. So option A is this: leaving the primary structure exactly where it is, preserving it, taking the existing secondary structure and moving it off outside the property onto the property. and then moving it to the back where we have a 5-foot setback. What's happening here is basically there's parking and then eventually there's the school. So this would allow a greater buffer between the primary and the secondary structure. It would also allow us to do the proposed addition, which we're looking to keep 7 feet between the secondary structure, the proposed addition, running the addition on a different axis than the main house is. The reason for that is this. Corner lots basically have a primary facade, which this one is Aspen Street. So from Aspen Street, we do know that this view is going to be preserved. Any addition to the back is going to be set furthest away from Aspen Street. This addition location will not undermine or compromise or thwart or overpower anything regarding the existing primary structure. Now we're looking at it from Galena aspect. So from the Galena aspect, when you look at it, even though this would be a secondary public right-of-way view to the parcel, you still have the width of the Dutch Colonial. You will have a smaller portion of the addition, and then you would have the full width of the shed. What this will do is allow a cleaner configuration of a primary structure, a secondary structure, and the proposed addition with the adequate space between them. And it will also allow a backyard in this corner here, which will basically be fairly private. So those are basically the pros and cons of this application. Massing wise, even though I'm not showing the context of the house below, I'm giving you guys an idea of how that orientation would be. Again, these are aerial views, so none of these are really from a pedestrian aspect, but what I didn't want to do is sit here and start to show you guys trees in front and try to hide or look like I'm hiding what I'm trying to propose here. This is an aerial view that gives you a very clear idea of how this connection would be. This would be a gable running this other way. There's a gable here in which would be echoed, so there would be a significant contextual connection between these two. However, this Dutch Colonial will still remain pure in its form, and this would be a different roof configuration. So you'll get an idea here of how that would actually look from the west. Basically, this view, you wouldn't necessarily see this view because there's a house in the way, but this is basically where we would actually push the addition. Towards the back, furthest away, where it would be closed in from public right-of-ways. So that's option A. I think it's a clean approach, like I said, with a hierarchy of structures and arrangements on the site. There is precedent around town. Like I said, it's been done. Sheds have been moved. If you guys feel like this is reasonable, I would like to pursue this further, and I look forward to your guys' comments. The next option is option B. What this does is basically it says that the location of the historic structures is sacred. They shall not be touched, even hold on to the property. So what this does, it leaves the historic structures in their actual place and does propose the addition where we have the space to actually put it. What it does is it allows this bump out on the upper level to remain intact. So the connection actually happens to the furthest corner away from any public right-of-way. So from Galena Avenue, this whole west facade would remain intact. The north facade would remain intact. The east facade and the majority of the south facade, which we actually don't see from Aspen Street. So this addition actually basically tries to hide furthest away from where the current structures are located. Okay. Looking at it contextually as to the same perspective and aerial views that I showed on the previous exhibit, you get the idea here that the location is set so far back from the primary facade, from the secondary shed facade, and is basically hiding in the back, creates all open corners for 3 of the 4 corners of this historic house, and all the 4 corners of the shed are actually exposed. So you'll get an idea here of what it looks like. Obviously, you don't see this from Aspen Street. You don't see this, obviously. This is an aerial view of it that actually shows you the location of it all the way furthest to the south. But what this does is it protects the location of the historic structures, if you guys consider that to be of importance. My goal in today's work session is to get your guys' feedback on which option do you guys feel is the best way for me to proceed. I don't want to get too hung up on technical details, roof forms, windows, and so on. I will definitely have those under the formal application. But I would like to get an idea from you guys whether you feel the secondary structure location is sacred, that it should not be moved at all. If that's the case, I would like to hear your guys' feedback on option B. If you guys feel like the secondary sheds are okay to be moved, then I would like to further discuss option A with you guys. That's my quick presentation, and I'm open to questions, comments, and I know it's a work session, so it's a little bit more free flow.
Got a question.
Yeah.
I asked the same thing to Jonna. Do you have a sense, Narcis, if the shed or its various configurations is what was originally built there and it's been moved around some on that site?
No, but there are 3 pods
Okay.
associated with this. So when you go inside the actual shed, you see the exterior sheathing of the other structures that have been added on to it. So there's no way to truly tell which portions of it in the RGS book, you actually see the whole context. I do think it has a level of charm that it is that funky, but there is no way for us to actually delineate as to when the dates of those pods were assembled.
Thank you.
But it was moved.
The sheds?
Yeah.
The sheds were brought on, yeah. So when you look at the Sambor maps, and unfortunately, it's only, I believe, the 1922 Sambor map actually shows the full portion of that lot. I was not able to find any other Sandboard maps that actually show it. So you can see here in this corner, you'll get an idea.
Yeah, after the period of significance, it was moved.
Yeah, so you can see it. And then as we go through here, you're going to see just corners of, you know, perhaps the shed, but we obviously don't see anything further to the west.
So Narcis, can you zoom into your 1904 map that shows sort of a long rectangular structure that looks like the same size of what's there now, but just
no. So this is the gable with the shed off the back. So this structure is gone.
Gotcha.
And whether it's been moved somewhere else in town or whether it was demoed, I don't know. But really what's happened is 1905, this was built. And then you see here a little corner of the shed, which I believe it's what's there existing. And then you see this portion. As to what's happening to the west, obviously we don't have anything until we get to 1922. And now it's shown this long rectangular one, which may or may not be what's currently reflected.
I think Mark asked if we know if it was moved, and I don't think we know that it was moved. It appears that it was added on to over time.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks for clarifying. Other questions or comments as we try to pick or look at A versus B at the moment, unless there's a C?
Well, I'd probably prefer somewhat of a hybrid approach. First of all, with regards to the secondary, is it secondary or accessory? It's accessory. With regards to the accessory, I think there's a compelling public interest in moving it onto the lot, moving it some number of feet further to the south. I can't remember how many times I fell hard on that sidewalk walking my daughter to elementary school. It freezes up there because right now there's no gutter on the shed portion that drips right onto the street into the shade, and it freezes. It's bad news. But at any rate, it's probably not enough to alleviate the shading onto the sidewalk, but moving it some distance onto the property. First of all, it's housekeeping, it cleans things up. Second of all, a bit of a setback to the sidewalk is what our guidelines are after for new construction. So I don't think its location for me personally is sacred. And as long as you're going to move it south, I think it probably for me makes sense to move it within 5 or 7 feet of the west property line as well. I don't personally have issues there. Now, this isn't a case where we're trying to save a tree or a root zone or any of those sorts of things, but I think moving it alone is in the public interest. And so that sort of opens up other options. With regards to the additions, I think option A for me is problematic, the way it interfaces with that south facade. Because of the protrusion, the shed roof protrusion, I think that's going to be and I understand here you're just showing us massing kind of studies, right? But that's a snow shedding, piling headache there in that valley. Secondly, this version is more apparent from Galena, whereas I prefer option B being restrained to sort of the corner, and on top of that, the least visible corner. And I think having that bit of open space that's in option B that is there on Galena is then also beneficial and satisfies guidelines to positive open space. I mean, it's nice to have that private open space back there, but I think the in option B, the open space on Galena is better for the neighborhood.
So,
better for
so
the
basically what you're
experience.
saying is you're okay with the shed being moved as long as the north facade of the proposed addition is pushed further back to open more of this corner.
Well, what I'm saying is if you go to option B real quickly, in option B, you're not proposing moving the shed.
Correct.
So I'm mixing and matching.
Okay.
Right. I think there's a compelling reason to move the shed.
Okay.
But I think I prefer this option B for the addition
Option B addition, moving the shed in option A.
for me.
Okay.
Yes. I think it's cleaner to attach here at the corner. You're not getting into that protrusion. Now, we could start talking about the preservation of historic material at the corner and the percentage of material you're going to touch by doing that. I think what HARC would really like, the guidelines would really like to see is a single story connector that is really minimally invasive to the historic material at that corner. And I don't think you're showing that here from what I can see. It's a 2-story connection. That'd be quite a loss of material and a loss of the corner, even though it's not highly visible. But I think that's taken that conversation further than you've given us to this point.
Thank you.
I'd like to jump in too. I don't really have a big issue with moving the secondary structure, which perhaps might give you more opportunity to articulate the addition. And I think that the least you touch it, the better. I think that having, attaching to that form that's on the back end of the gambrel roof is problematic. And I think that a smaller attachment, maybe with moving the secondary structure, gives you more opportunity to articulate this addition and make it fit with the historic building a little better. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
I'll chime in. I agree wholeheartedly with both what Bob and Stacy have said. I don't mind the repositioning. I think it's actually beneficial. I would like to see a little bit of maybe more separation from the new mass to the historic. And I think if you can go down to a 1-story addition connector, that would help. And then I agree kind of with Bob, if you're repositioning that shed structure farther to the west, it gives you a little bit more flexibility, freedom. And would you or your clients be okay with us if, coming back, if we require some significant vegetation on sort of both public sides of that, you're not even going to be able to see your addition?
We would actually, yeah. So in my initial just studies, I'm proposing quite a bit of that to buffer that addition from Aspen.
Yeah.
And also from Galena, having some shrubs going across. Absolutely.
That would be huge. I appreciate you bringing this to us at this stage. This is great to see.
Yeah, I agree. Anything else?
Any other board members, comments or questions or weighing in on looks like option B is favored at the moment?
Well, it's a combination of B and A, moving the structure and putting the addition generally where B is. Right?
Yeah.
In the comments? Okay.
Yeah, Mark, I'll jump in, I guess. Insofar as it would be in the best interest of preservation, moving the shed would be okay. Wouldn't necessarily want to move it too much more from where it's at, would be my opinion on it.
Okay.
And for the same reasons that everyone's been talking about, the aspect of option B here that's a little more attractive is how potentially how much less historic material you're going to be losing from the historic structure. Whether it's vegetation screen or something, I know given this type of a drawing up of it, it's going to make it look more obvious than it is, but the massing is going to be something we'll have to look at, the connector, all that stuff to make it appear a lot less than it is. Putting it right next to the building, it's the best practice would say put it behind, but of those two options, I think this is probably the more sensitive for the loss of historic material aspect.
Yep. I think what this does is, even though obviously the addition is not going to be invisible, it'll be obviously different materials. The Dutch colonial main house has horizontal siding and shingles. The historic shed has vertical hardwood siding, so it's so comically typical. It's beautiful, actually. So the addition is going to be obviously a different material, but what it'll do is it'll stand out as a product of its own time. But it'll also be, if it does get removed, then the structure, the defining corners of the historic structures can remain intact. So that was more my goal on this option B, is to not necessarily make it invisible, but make it sensitive enough where it's clear it's an addition. It's an addition from a different period, but the historic structures actually still stand out and dominate both facades from Galena and Aspen.
Okay. And of course, when we get there, the key word is if there's a one-story connector or whatever, but subordinate, meaning less than this full contributing house height and mass and scale appearance for sure, which I know you know. And not to be a dead horse, but just since it is a work session, you know, that second floor appendage, would you put up the elevations, the colored rendering elevations, colored photos real quick? Just okay. So to me, none of this know.
Hold on a second. So Mark, this one?
Right there. Yeah. So upper right hand showing the east elevation and the lower right showing the west. None of us know for sure what happened between the map of 1908 and 1922 or 1909, I guess it was. But when I look at this, certainly I think we could all agree on one thing, and that is when you look at the upper right, east elevation, the west elevation matched it, and that's what Dutch Revival is. Somebody cobbled this up. I don't know how anybody could defend, well, today we wouldn't allow it. So whether it was after 13 or just a couple months before, who knows what, I think what we do know is that the history, restoring it to the historic look when it was built in 05 would be a betterment. But does that appendage, even if we go with B, I guess it doesn't really affect your design?
You know, Mark, it doesn't really affect my design. I did talk to Jonna. She did mention there was the work session a year or so ago, and that board felt that this pod should remain. I don't want to, get adversarial about it. I do feel that it looks like a wart tacked on to this beautiful face. But again, if those things were done historically, and because they're historic, they're sacred, I understand that. My gut feeling as an architect, and I think what would obviously be an asset to the community, would be to remove that pod and to have that clear facade. And then the addition would be obviously to the corner. So that facade could actually be open and fairly dominant, which is a pure Dutch colonial. I think the pod added on the upper level does bastardize this facade, But again, we're dealing with historic in that period. So if the board feels that you guys are okay with me exploring removing that, yeah, I would definitely do it.
Well, just to ask the question, I'd like to just take a straw poll. To me, restoring it to its Dutch revival status, whether it was a couple months before or a couple years before 13 or after, it's, and I thought this last time, but it's a different board today. I was outnumbered. So I just take a straw poll. We'll start with Andrew and go down the line that way. And Bob, you chime in after Andrew. Yes or no with respect to, if we're in doubt, do we restore it or leave it?
I honestly could go either way. I do, like you were saying, I think that, you know, it'd be very prominent. And also there's not many homes like this in our town. So I think giving it some exposure on the rear facade to match the front in a way would really be unique and contribute to the, what I would think would be the historical preserving of that.
Okay, Bob?
Well, I'm troubled by this whole, because, you know, I actually once thought about buying this house, and the thing that really threw me off was the back end part of the building. But I'm not real comfortable about removing it.
Okay. All right, then we go around the corner. I think Stacy was sitting by me.
Well, like Bob, I'm troubled. I'll be looking forward to what Kieran has to say here. It's not enough for me to not like it. It's proximate to the period of significance. I think if I saw this as an application and saw what that south facade could look like, and I won't call it restored, replicated, because that south facade has been this way for a very long time, maybe I would entertain. I'm not a definite no, but it does have some of that funkiness that some of our community members love so much. I'm kind of torn. I could argue myself either way. Clear, you know, architectural purity is not what we're always after on the HARC board.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
I agree.
Kieran.
Yeah.
Kieran.
Matt?
I'll chime in.
Yeah.
It's a little hard. I do feel like it's a wart. It's really more the windows to me that really detract from sort of the historic nature of it. I would be fine with it going away. Narcissus, have you done any investigation, pulled the finishes off and looked at any of the?
It was added on, obviously, as to the delineating the period. No, there's no way to tell.
You know, it's tough, but I guess I would vote that you could take it off.
Okay.
That's Mark and Matt.
It's floor area.
Well, yeah, I would say it's actually easy, leave it on. If you're gonna look at it from a point purely of what you would do, Mark, I mean, maybe you can say take it off, but they're not looking at it as the architectural style. In all likelihood, they're looking at, we need space, so we're gonna get space.
Yeah.
It wasn't added so much later that it's a historical anomaly. We know it was there in 22. And so it is an addition. The guidelines encourage additions that are older, certainly that may have been put in during the period of significance, should remain. It helps tell the story of the house, it helps tell the story of the context of the site and all of that. So I wouldn't vote for it at all if it was removed. I think, but not without seeing the plans.
Okay. So remove is just Mark and Matt. Stacy's on the fence. Kieran and Bob said no. And Andrew, were you okay to remove, right? Mark, Matt, and Andrew. So Mark, Matt, and Andrew said okay to remove. Kieran and Bob said no. And Stacy was TBD.
More information.
We'll have 7 members when they come back to break the
Oh,
tie.
yeah, that'd be nice.
Okay.
Okay, well, we're really here to talk about the addition, but this is such an important, there's only 2 or 3 of these Dutch Revival homes in Telluride. I get like Kiernan's point that, well, yeah, people added things, but boy, I just sure would have liked to have seen this architecture mimic, which I know it did when it was built, east and west. But
I could just add, I think, contrary to that, I think that this adds to the funkiness of the town. It's been there since anybody's alive, I think, that's still here. And we've all seen it forever. And it just to me, just to rip that off just makes no sense.
Yeah, well, just to follow up on that, old is not necessarily historic. So it being old isn't enough for me, but it's really close. So close, in fact, that we don't know.
Yeah, I think error on the side of caution.
okay,
Great. Thank you, guys. I really appreciate the feedback. I appreciate you guys being succinct and giving me clear direction. I appreciate that.
all right, thank you. Oh, wait, we better see if there's any public comment. Chance to weigh in public session, but I don't see anybody.
Just out of curiosity, what's going in your addition?
What's up?
Just out of curiosity, what's going in the addition? Like kitchen?
Oh, no.
Master?
So before so I've done some sketching. It'll basically most likely be a bedroom with walkout onto the backyard. And upstairs, I wanted to have this work session before I actually start to present anything specific, whether you guys are okay with a 2-story link or a 1-story link and how that would actually connect. But basically, I'm looking to have a bedroom downstairs on the bottom of the addition.
Got it.
I would have a public comment, actually.
Could you come up to the microphone and state your name, please?
Hey, Mark. It's Brian Ahern. I'm actually a current applicant. I had served on HARC a few years ago, but there's one thing that maybe Nargis might know already in his research, but I did a lot of work for the sisters, and the one sister was passed out the window right across the street, and she was afraid of water her whole life because of the flood of 1914 that happened. And so I don't know if you guys are kind of taking that into consideration of what kind of alterations might have happened to those structures after such a cataclysmic event that happened in 1914. That'd be my public comment.
Thank you.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Interesting.
Thanks again for bringing it at this stage, Narcissus.
Yep,
Nice
thank
to
you.
see that.
Thank you.
Good luck. Okay, our last item is the public hearing item.
Hey, Mark, sorry, before you open this last item, I'm gonna have to recuse myself of conflict of interest. I'm actually gonna go sit at the applicant table.
Oh, how lucky are we?
Okay, that's allowed. Okay, all right. So the project for public hearing is 453 West Pacific. It's consideration of applications for A, B, C, D, E, F, G as written. Legal description is block 5, lot 14, and the west half of lot 13, West Telluride Edition. The address is 453 West Pacific in the Accommodations 1 district. Owner is Telluride 453 LLC, applicant Alpine Planning, and staff member Erica Jensen. Erica.
All right. This is the final small scale review at 453 West Pacific. This project is located in the Accommodations 1 zone district and the residential commercial treatment area. It is located in the historic district, and there are 2 rated structures on site. The primary structure is rated supporting and the shed is rated contributing. It's a complex project, so we'll go through all the different parts. First, it's an addition to the supporting primary structure, repositioning of the primary structure about 2 feet to the east, so it's not as close to the property line. alterations to the primary structure, including raising the house about a foot, repositioning of the contributing shed about a foot to the south to move it further off the alley, alterations of the shed, including raising it about a foot and removing a non-historic addition, new construction of a secondary structure. This structure is a garage, and then finally demolition of a non-designated secondary structure. So let's start with the easiest. On the screen is a photo of the non-designated secondary structure that is proposed to be demolished. Staff has found that all standards of demolition have been met. Next, we can talk about the shed. On the screen are pictures from the 1987 and 1997 surveys. It is clear from the surveys that the shed underwent an addition sometime between 1987 and 1997. The applicant would like to remove the non-historic addition and return the shed back to the size reflected in the 1987 survey, as well as the Sanborn maps.
Can I jump in here with a quick
Yeah.
question? Looks like the siding is different. Is that the case? It's been reclad
The
material?
southern, it appears that only the southern elevation has been reclad. It actually appears they probably repurposed the siding from the southern part before the addition and then put it.
So there is historic material existing.
We believe the siding is historic.
Thank you.
And staff finds that removing this addition is appropriate if the applicant would like to. So looking at the Sanborn maps, it appears that the house was built at around 1908. The structures that appear from 1893 to 1899 were most likely demolished. And the 2013 survey states the house was likely built around 1908. As you can see from the 1908 and 1922 Sanborn maps, there are many changes between this time, including a relatively large rear addition. While the period of, so we're going to run into this again, which we just talked about in the work session. While the period of significance is only until 1913, it is inconclusive if the rear addition was built before 1913. So erring on the side of caution, it means the rehabilitation standards apply to this rear addition. I also want to point out that while the Sanborn maps are a great tool and resource, they do have their limitations, one of which can be that there are discrepancies between maps. As you can see, there are scaled discrepancies between the 1908 and 1922 maps. And I think this is really important to know. In the 1908 map, that L-shaped gable form appears wider than it does in the 1922 map. That gable form was most likely the same size. The scale on the maps is just off, and that is a pretty important discrepancy. So based off the Sanborn maps, the current structure and site assessment, it appears that the rear portion of the house was added onto again after 1922, and a story was added onto the top of the rear addition. So there have been modifications, but staff has been out to the property a number of times, and on the screen now are examples of some of the siding. So the siding on the west facade could give an accurate representation of what is historic versus what is not. The picture on the left shows the west facade. The siding in the red box is much different from the siding on the rest of this elevation, indicating that this rear part of the house may not be historic. The same is true for the siding on the east elevation, and the siding shown on the right is clearly newer siding from a non-historic addition, probably added in the 80s or 90s. Because it appears that there is a large amount of historic material left, the rehabilitation standards apply to the whole structure and not just the front part of the structure. And it is important to remember that this supporting resource needs to be treated with a high level of sensitivity. So we're going to go through the conditions regarding the shed first. Condition 12 is to remove the new roof on the south elevation. Condition 13 is to revise the 3-pack of doors on the shed to be more traditional proportions and simple in design. And condition 14 is to remove the trash enclosure from the shed and relocate it elsewhere on site. So while staff is supportive of removing the non-historic addition on the shed and returning it to its likely original proportions, the treatment of the contributing resource is not appropriate. Adding a shed roof form on the south facade, as well as a large 3-pack of doors, is not in line with rehabilitation standards and they're not appropriate alterations as it drastically changes this historic resource and does not respect the utilitarian nature of the shed. The applicant is also proposing and setting a trash enclosure in the northeast corner of the shed, and it's unclear what this would look like, what the doors would look like, and it generally is just not an appropriate alteration, especially as there are other locations on site that the trash enclosure could fit. So next we'll move on to conditions regarding the primary structure. So condition 1 is to revise the new addition to be clearly distinguishable and subordinate to the historic building. While the new addition is relatively small, it's not adequately delineated from the historic structure. On the west side, it is directly attached to the roof line and makes it hard to tell the historic from the new construction. And especially from the alley, it appears as one form on the west side, which you can see on the drawing on the left. And on the right, it is slightly inset, but from the alley, you can't tell that it's inset at all on that west side, and it does appear as one roof line. Condition 2 is to reduce the number of dormers, reduce the size of the remaining dormers, and ensure that there are none visible from the front facade. And condition 3 is to remove the west gable to better preserve the historic roof form. The roof form changes dramatically with 3 new shed roof dormers and a new gable form on the west elevation. It's clear that this changes the roof form from the street, which is discouraged in the rehabilitation standards. On the left, you can see the bottom red is a new gable that's being added. And then the top red is that shed dormer that you can see from the street. And then 2 of the new dormers are also very large for a historic house and visible from the front and the alley. And you can see those 2 very large shed dormers on the right-hand side. Condition 8 is to remove the skylights from the historic gable form and reduce the number of skylights. And condition 9 is to revise the brick chimney to clearly show that is part of the new development. There are 5 proposed skylights, 2 of which are on the front historic gable form. These are very visible and should be removed. The 2 skylights on the new addition do seem appropriate. And the proposed brick chimney seems to imitate historic chimneys, and there should be a clear distinction that this chimney is not part of the historic structure. Condition 4 is to revise the front porch / patio to better reflect the historic size and form. And condition 5 is to revise the bay window structure and windows to be no larger than what currently exists. So on the left of the screen is a picture of the house from around 1920. As you can see, it does have a small covered front porch. The applicant is proposing to restore this small front porch, which is appropriate, but is also proposing to add a large patio as an extension of this porch. This large of a porch patio, whatever you would like to call it, was not seen, especially at the front of the house, and does not respect historic proportions. The front patio needs to be revised to better reflect what was seen historically. And then on the front facade, there is also a non-historic bay window that was added long after the period of significance, probably in the 80s or 90s. This is a non-compliant element that can remain, but it should not be altered to be more non-compliant. The applicant is proposing to enlarge this bay window element as well as enlarge the windows. The bay element can remain, but should remain the same size with the same size windows. Condition 6 is to remove or revise the 3-pack of doors on the east facade of the historic house to better reflect designs found historically. Condition 7 is to reduce the size of the windows on the east elevation under the dormer. Condition 10 is to revise the 3-pack doors throughout the proposal to contain less glass. And condition 11 is to reduce the size of the 3-pack of doors on the primary structure and south elevation of the garage. The windows under the new shed dormer are unusually large, especially for a rated structure, and the doors are fairly large as well. And the doors throughout the project contain a large amount of glass that do cause concern over light spill. So these are the 15 conditions. Staff is recommending continuation of this application, not because of the addition, but because of the concerns over the treatment of the historic resources on the property. Both the shed and primary structure need to be treated with a higher level of sensitivity. And it's a complex application. I'm happy to answer any questions, provide more information, clarify before we hear from the applicant.
Okay, very thorough. Questions for Erica?
Could you go back to that, the 3 elevations of the siding? I was, the photographs. You're saying that on the left photograph, the section that you have in red is different than the rest of the building?
Yeah, it's hard to tell in the photos. It's easier to see when you're out there, but that little rear section of the house, the siding does appear much different than the rest of that elevation.
Okay. Because it looks the same to me.
It does in the photo. It does not in person.
Okay. Thank you.
Follow-up question with
Yeah.
that, is that section you're highlighting, that last, 6, 8, 10 feet of the northern side of the addition, is that historic, or do we think that that little piece is older? But you got highlighted in red, basically the actual structure on the left.
On the left. So we think everything to the right of that is historic, built prior to 1922. That little portion that's highlighted in red was most likely built after that time.
Thank you.
Other questions? Erica, number 8. Were there, I'm looking at the drawing, weren't there only 2 skylights on the historic gable form, or were there 3? 1, 2, oh, I guess there are 3, huh?
The 2 of largest concern are the 2 at the very front, because those are very visible from the street.
Okay, so, because we have allowed it, but those 2 are the visible, so remove the skylights from the historic house, but you might think they'd comply if they remove the 2 that are visible.
Yeah, I think that could be a good compromise.
Yeah, okay. All right, I don't have any questions. And anybody else? Okay, then let's hear from the applicant. If you want to share your screen, please.
Hi, good evening. Chris Hawkins with Alpine Planning. Thank you, Erica, for the analysis and presentation. This house and its location down in Pacific has been a lot of things over time. That front beautiful deck you're looking at was put on because it was a restaurant at one point in time. It's been used as a residence. And there's obviously been a lot of alterations. So, and I think Erica did a great job pointing out all the changes overall down here. As far as what to add to Erica's comments, even the historic survey caught there was a rear, non-historic addition that had been built on the original home. And then this was another comment, an apparent somewhat older rear addition is reasonably compatible with the house's original construction. It is minimally visible from the street. So those comments from the historic survey were a little bit, and Tommy can talk about this after I'm done, of Tommy's inspiration on the design of the house and how to shift the house over and try to keep its form and then look at the addition. So just a little bit more of a dive into the Sanborn maps. I was just looking at these, and we do these on all the historic projects. I know you guys hear Sanborn maps probably 60 times in a meeting anymore, but just to look at, how does this Sanborn map relate to even a modern survey? Like how accurate were Sanborn maps? And, if you look at the survey today, it's 28.5 feet wide and it's 29 feet on the 1908 map. So pretty damn close on the 1908 map, and, a depth of about 25 feet, 9 inches, setbacks, et cetera. And then the shed 15 by 12. And again, today, this shed is basically about the same width, 14 feet. So again, it's, the Sanborn maps, it's about a 2 foot, maybe a little bit more level of accuracy, depending upon the year. I agree with Erica, the 1922 map is less accurate than 1908, but there's 6 feet added onto this at one point in time, which was a big change. This is the 1922 map. And again, if you look at the 33 feet from front to back, I trust the scale a little bit on this, just because you have to, even if you say it's off a little bit, you know, and so that added about 7 more feet to the historic form beyond what would have been a wall back here someplace. So definitely this was a 1-story element in the back. And this just looks at the changes kind of side by side. And I agree, you know, there's definitely a skew here going on, you know, a little bit, because see how white, and I don't know if this incorporated the front porch or didn't, or who knows what, but again, just dimensionally, if you look at that map to this map, there's clearly the addition. And then today it goes all the way out to 43.5 feet. So quite a bit more beyond, almost 10 feet more than what was shown on the 1922 map. And so when you overlay all those maps, I know it's one of those tools, it's a rough tool to kind of show changes over time between the brown 1908, the blue 1922 with its skewed data, and then the rear addition. So even this is about 13 feet, a little over 13 feet. So even if you give a 2-foot level of error, it's around 10 feet. And Erica caught those differences out in the field, which was great. And she showed it on her slides in those pictures. So we clearly know there was this non-historic addition in the back, and that's backed up by the photos. This is one of the few houses where you have a direct shot, great shot of the house. And interestingly, this was in 1921. So there's a whole series of photos down there. And so Eric already talked about the shed. I did want to point out that there was no HARC approval or no building permits pulled for these alterations. So it was, you know, unfortunate, and it happened between 1987 and 2013. But they did happen, and the intent is to try to get it back somewhat to its historic form as much as possible. In terms of the shed itself, our client Pascal, he went to the extent of opening up the interior walls to determine the level of historic framing, and there's little to no historic framing on the inside. So it really is the wood siding out there. And Jonna reminded me yesterday that, you know, historic rating is also based on location and scale and time it's been there and other factors besides exterior materials, and we understand that. But you know, it just looks like it's 3 of the 4 sites. So the design approach for this that Tommy took was really based on Carl McWilliams' opinion that it's reasonably compatible addition to shift the whole house over to have a nominal, you know, 3-foot setback, and then do an addition on the rear. So any remaining element of that 1-story addition shown on the 1922 photo was retained in the design. And so it was really trying to have a big sustainability move and keep the home without a lot of demolition. And the addition itself was done to a non-historic part of a building. And so we weren't as aware of we are right now that town staff still is holding that the RE standards apply to even when you're doing additions to non-historic portions of buildings that are attached to rated structures. And we had a good meeting and conversation about that yesterday. So we understand the RE standards will apply here. We actually don't even want to talk about the conditions because we understand them and know what changes need to be made. This is just showing the design shift over that, you know, was for the setback and the rear addition. And so, you know, and looking forward to how we come back to you in December, we wanted to really try to use this as an opportunity tonight to get your input on the design as presented tonight. I'm sure Tommy's going to talk about that a little bit when I'm done, but also if you don't accept that design as presented and, you know, agree with condition 1, then, you know, there are clearly, you know, 2 options, at least in our mind. M2 right here, the section line, this is kind of the end of the current home as built, you know, so we'd have to come back with a, you know, a 1-story connector and then, you know, somehow do an addition back there. There's not a lot of room between here and there, the shed though. And so the other option that we'd like to explore is potentially demolishing that back 10 feet or so. We'll have to get precise measurements out in the field and get those translated to plans and keep a 2-story, or sorry, a 1.5-story building here at where it was historic 1-story. This would have been the historic module, and then do the addition at 1.5 stories with the new connector. So there's kind of 2 options that, we can come back with on this. And we really wanted both to hear from, since this is new, town staff hasn't even seen this option I'm talking about now, both, the more so on this option. This shows the same kind of view just on the existing, floor plan survey with my non-architectural block diagram showing a connector and a 1.5-story addition. You have to envision the gable roof form there. So there's those 2 options, and we really would like to understand, it's a supporting structure, so we don't have to recreate. So we think that keeping, if we can remove that non-historic addition, go back and leave this at 1.5 stories, that might give a little bit more breathing room between this addition and the shed, because we know also too, you're going to consider the relationship between this addition and the shed and the massing. So with that, I would, just ask, this is kind of another option that's out there. We did this at 336 North Oak. And I hate this gray area between the 1908 maps and the 1922 maps. I think there should be a good discussion about the period of significance and trying to match it to a map, so we're not having this madness of trying to fill in the gray areas, but that's just my opinion. But would it be better to even go back to the 1908 historic cross gable form with the new connector too? And given your last meeting and what I heard with Narcissus project, I understand that, there's probably more of an error on the side of caution. And you almost assume anything shown on the 1922 map was built before the period of significance end, and you want to retain it because we don't have evidence otherwise. And I get it, but at least at what we did at 336 North Oak, because the 1922 map showed really bad additions to that house, we actually got it back to the cross gable form there, which it's going to be a lot better home in the end. And hopefully, I just want to toss out this kind of last option to go back to the 1908 form just for conversation, but I know that's a more difficult path than the second option, which is simply, kind of going back to the, whereas the 1922 map ends at about 33 feet. So with that, I'll end my comments and ask Tommy to chime in and virtually kick me or add where I missed.
No, thanks, Chris. Yeah, I just want to give everybody an update. We met with Jonna early in this process, and we did a lot of analysis on these maps. So, I feel in many ways, this is kind of a new approach or a new way of enforcing kind of the RE standards on an addition that I thought we collectively with staff had agreed was a non-historic 1.5 story addition early on. So we went in the direction you see tonight, very early on, maybe show. And it clearly stated, we assumed, and we have done this on other projects, that since the 1.5 story addition to the existing T-shape, we'll call it, was already there, and the house was still supporting with the 1.5 story addition on the rear, that we would just preserve, that's a good elevation there, Chris, that we would just kind of preserve that concept. I'm okay getting rid of that other gable. We were just looking at a smaller form up front, but the idea was that we used this concept of this form that extended back from the T-shaped gable, and then we made an addition onto that. But because that was a non-historic addition, we felt there was more latitude. I mean, that's the way I've been interpreting it for 30 years, right? That if it's a non-historic addition, it's under different guidelines. The historic portion of the historic, which is basically the front porch, the original form from 1899, 1908 facing Pacific, you know, if you look at the streetscape, if you can pull that up, Chris, you know, the streetscape is what's important. The streetscape, the setback to the forms, you know, we preserved all of that, even though we slid it a little bit east for the setbacks. I don't know if you have the streetscape, Chris.
It's right there.
Yeah, so what I want to show on the streetscape, you can pan down a little bit, Chris. Well, yeah, I just want to show everybody just the scale of this structure on the streetscape. Like Pacific, you know, this block of Pacific, this is one of the really kind of small, much smaller things that occur on this street. And, you know, I want everyone to be clear that accommodations, one, standards as historic residential. And I feel like potentially we're in this area now where we're kind of putting the HR guidelines on what's really, you know, historic residential accommodations zoning. And when you have a context that is much, much larger, you know, even if you look at what we're doing, it is, even what we're proposing is literally dwarfed. It's dwarfed by the houses to the east as you go up Pacific, and to the west, some of these duplexes. You know, Chris brought up a good point that it's currently a duplex and we're going back to a single family. So in many ways, we're also downzoning, you know, this lot and a half. And so we do have more flexibility, obviously. But it would be good. I mean, I'm a little bummed, quite frankly, that we thought we had a good direction. We put some effort into this because we thought it was a simpler approach to add on to the story and a half that was existing, rather than, you know, demoing basically what was there from, you know, it's just hard to tell. We don't really know. There's no foundation left from that 22 addition on the rear.
Hey, Tommy, you're breaking up a little bit.
To, you know, 3.5 year.
Hey, Tommy, you're breaking up.
I think that's necessary approach. Can you hear me now?
That's better.
Yeah.
Can you hear me now, Mark?
Echoing.
Yeah, thank you. There was, it was
Can you
like,
hear me now?
Yeah, it's
Okay.
a lot better. Thank you.
Okay, I was getting too far away, I think. What I'd like the board to look at is say, okay, hey, do we like this approach using this non-historic addition and then adding that? Or would we rather see, you know, I personally would rather go back to just the T-shape. You know, if that's what we're going to do, let's go back to 1908, apply the link and the addition that we've done on other projects. You know, that's what we should talk about tonight. You know, that's the major design direction. You know, we went in this direction. We thought we had Jana's support, and then Eric kind of threw this curveball at us without communicating, I thought, as well as she could last week. But we are ultimately super malleable. We care and we want the best solution. So we're asking the HARC board tonight to look at both of those options and to share their ideas with us.
Okay. All right. So obviously it's going to be a continuation, but they asked for feedback looking at these options. And I mean, we got to get this part right first, and then the rest of it as far as doors and patios and all that
Mark?
stuff.
Is there any public comment before we go into deliberations?
Well, I was gonna see if there were any questions of the applicant, and then I thought then I'll go to public comment. So, but thank you. So the question is, before we lose them, to public and then deliberations, do you have, anybody have some questions related to perhaps these options of leaving the non-historic and having a T versus what's on with the new connector, the 1.5 story back? Can we get some feedback from board members or questions, first of all?
Can I jump in here for a second?
Sure.
So I'm not sure if it's appropriate to be giving this type of feedback because as staff, we've had no time to review this. We reviewed the application that was submitted, and this is turning into more of a work session than a public hearing item.
Okay, well, I've asked for questions. No, I understand that. And
Oh, sorry, Mark.
you've not seen it, so I get it. But still, I'd just like for the board to ask questions, which might help them work closer with you now that you've seen it, to come up with one design here on the rear that we think is most compliant. But if there are questions, not necessarily.
I also want to just provide a little bit of clarification. The new addition that's proposed, there were pretty minimal conditions around the new addition. Staff found that addition pretty compliant. It needed to be inset more from the historic shape, but overall, generally, the mass and scale and the design of it was relatively compliant. I think the issue is, and what the applicant is trying to get at is, that existing part could be non-historic, which there's no way to prove it. If it is a non-historic addition, it still can't be made more non-compliant than it already is. And the proposed changes are making it more non-compliant than it already is. But the rear addition they're proposing is relatively small and compliant. So I don't know if changing the entire project is necessary.
Yeah, thanks, Erica, for that, excuse me, that clarification, because I took condition number 1 as a fairly drastic condition as written. So I appreciate the clarification for that.
Yeah, it just says distinguishable and more subordinate, that's all.
So, yeah, and it's just to the degrees of that and how that affects it. So,
well, let's just see if there's any questions. First of all, that's what we need to do. And then we can go to public comment and then we can deliberate. So any questions for the applicant? And I think, again, staying on mass and scale, the first couple here, as Erica said, majority of these are about the historic house, not the addition. Questions? No. No questions.
No.
Okay, any public comment? So, not seeing any public comment, I think, you guys know how to do this. Get with staff and have them weigh in on your questions, since the board had no particular questions. And, put your best foot forward next time and on whichever one of these 2 options you feel and staff can be congruent on, is most compliant. So, okay, well, let me ask on the 15 conditions, do we agree with all of them? Or do you have any additional ones that before we have a motion?
Mark, I can jump in, and I would just say, I thought the analysis of the project was really well done and thorough. I think all 15 conditions are appropriate, and I don't know that they would make sense to add too many more, given some of the changes that are going to need to happen.
Yeah, and this is final, but now we're going to see it again. So to your point, yeah.
I want to jump in, Mark. I agree with Kieran, and I think Erica did a great job of analyzing this project and crafting the conditions. I have nothing else to add. And I'll say, when I read her condition number 1 and saw her slide on the screen, what that meant to me was just break that roof, drop it another foot on the western side. It's already
Yeah.
set back in. I think for me, if you did that small change, it would be subordinate. And I don't see this as the sort of drastic change that you guys are suggesting from my perspective.
Okay. And again, we're in deliberation, so we can't go back and forth, but the only thing that I would say in those 15 is the one Eric and I talked about on number 8 is remove the 2 skylights that are visible, which is traditionally or consistently what we do, but that would be it. Eliminate the ones that are not visible on the historic gable. I don't know if there's any consensus in that or not, but 8 would say remove the 2 skylights that are visible from the street, from the historic gable.
I would
And then,
agree.
yeah,
So what change to 8 are you proposing? Seems like that's what it's saying.
no, remove the 2 skylights. There's 3 of them though. They're a mat, I think. Remove the 2 skylights that are visible from street from the historic gable. In other words, i.e. that leaves 1 that's not visible, and reduce the overall number of skylights.
Sounds good.
That's just further clarification, because I think, yeah, I'm fine with that.
Okay. Okay, well, 1 through 15 as it stands then. Who would like to make the motion?
Can I just ask a clarifying point
Yeah.
of order here? What happens with the demolition?
We do not, you do not read the demolition motion. That is read when the other part of the project is
Do we
approved.
need to continue that as well or no?
No.
Okay, cool.
Bob, did you chime in on the 1 through 15?
Yeah, I totally agree with the comments. I think Tommy understands what we're saying in number 1, that it's just some minor tweaking to it. And I agree with changing number 8.
Just so that the applicant has a little more clarity, do you guys agree with my thought of just adjusting that roof so that it's not a continuous from the existing structure to the addition? Would that be enough for you guys?
I think we should just let him respond his own way. And when we see it, see if it works. But he understands what we're thinking about.
Yeah, I don't think it needs much more clarification.
Fair enough, Andrew. Do you have? I can make the motion.
Okay,
We're
Matt.
ready.
Yes, sir.
I move to continue to the December 13th, 2023 HARC meeting, the proposed small scale addition, small scale repositioning, minor scale repositioning, major scale alterations, and minor scale new construction at 453 West Pacific, Block 5, Lot 14, and the west half of Lot 13, West Telluride Edition, based on the findings and staff memo dated October 18th, 2023, and with the following conditions, 1 through 15 as stated. This motion is based on evidence and testimony provided at a public hearing on October 18th, 2023, with notice of such hearing provided as required by the Telluride Land Use Code.
I'll second that.
Could I have a friendly amendment on number 8?
What is it, Mark?
Well, it's the one I mentioned, just to clarify, remove, I would like to suggest, if you'd accept it, to remove the 2 skylights that are visible from the street from the historic gable form, and the rest as written.
I'll accept that friendly amendment.
I'll accept it as well.
Anything else? Hey, Kieran?
Kieran, yes.
Matt, yes.
Bob, yes.
Andrew, yes.
Mark, yes. Okay, very good. We'll see you. Oh, and we have to have a motion on, well, Erica, are we gonna?
No motion on that.
Yeah, no motion at all, not even continuation. Okay.
Yeah. All right, thank you. I really appreciate the clarification on that condition. It's very helpful.
Okay, thanks, guys. All right.
Yep, have a good night.
Okay, I think, John, we're up. Did we need a 5-minute bio break, or everybody good to look through these 3 sections that we've completed. Good? Okay,
Everybody's good.
good. All right.
Before we start with the guidelines, there's another thing I'd like to mention quickly, so I don't forget when we're done. That is, I'm sharing my screen. That is, that town council has asked for, updates to the membership to boards and commissions, kind of across the board through town. HARC and P and Z specifically, are outlined in the land use code. And so this no longer will come to HARC as a review and recommendation like it would have before we changed the land use code, but it will be going to Planning and Zoning Commission next week for a review and recommendation to town council for these changes to the composition and adding term limits to HARC and P and Z. So while I'm not asking for comments today, I want you to be aware of what's going on. And if you do have comments or concerns, you could certainly attend P and Z next Thursday or town council in November. It'll be the end of November before this gets to council because of the election. But the changes are fairly minor, but may have bigger impacts. So in the land use code in section 90202 talks about membership and composition of HARC, the makeup of HARC. And this is where the term limits would be added. And they're proposing 4 consecutive 2-year terms for HARC and P and Z members. So that's 8 years of service. That doesn't mean that you couldn't go off for 1 term and then come back on if there's a position available. And again, this is being considered for all boards and commissions, term limits for all boards and commissions. And the other thing that's changed is the qualifications for HARC specifically. We've tried to tighten it up a little bit so that all members of HARC shall be competent in, have special knowledge of architecture, history, planning, archaeology, historic preservation, building or design. We removed the interest in to align with our requirements from the state. And then the other item in this red line is the eligibility. Previously, someone would have to have lived in the town for 1 year prior to becoming eligible to serve on HARC. That means that people who live in Mountain Village and work in Telluride, even if they move to Telluride, would still have to wait a year before becoming eligible. So this change says that you need to live in the R1 school district for a year prior to moving to town, at which time you're immediately eligible for serving on HARC and P and Z. And that helps widen the pool a little bit. People still have to live in town, but they might have moved more recently than a year into town. So
John, has there been any discussion about an at-large seat possibly? For someone who lives in the school district, but not within the town limits or any of
no,
that?
that came up again recently, and I think that it's not for quasi judicial boards. It's not terribly defensible.
Okay.
And so that idea kind of has gone away, but this helps alleviate that pressure a little bit.
Right, I mean, that's good to know that there's a practical
Yeah.
reason. I mean, we do have so many qualified people who live just
We do.
outside of town
Yeah.
limits, but
And
it is what it is.
who've lived in the area and are familiar with the ongoing. So
But what's
Yes.
what's the problem with that though, John? If we're one at large seat being an R1 district, but not in the town, what's that problem? Is it a legal issue?
it is, it's not consistent with other communities around the state. I think legal is concerned that it would be difficult to defend a non-citizen making decisions about land use matters. And that's an opinion from our legal staff.
Okay, and last question as a follow-up, did they talk about what if they work here? Then they
No,
have, No.
there's no more interest in talking about it right now. There may be
Okay.
with a new council, but legal did not advise them to go forward with it.
Okay, and then last question, with the 8-year term limits, how many empty seats on all these boards and commissions would this create? I've heard 8 to 10 possibly.
I don't know among all the boards and commissions. I'm aware of our HARC and P and Z. HARC won't be impacted immediately. I think, Mark, you're at the upper limit. Probably this is maybe your 8th year.
9th year.
This is your 9th year, so this would be your last year. Again,
Right.
you could go off for a term and then come back if you wanted.
Go serve P and Z.
P and Z, yeah, you could serve on P and Z. P and Z will be more affected because they have more longer serving
Yeah.
members.
Wow. Are they short a member like we
You're
are?
aware of this, right?
Sorry.
They've talked about this.
Yeah, the P and Z has not talked about this. They will next week.
Wow.
At which time I'm sure this will come up. Because there's a chance that Lee Shea could be elected to council, which would be a vacancy. And then I think there would be at least 2 or 3 other P and Z members who would be affected by this.
Jeez, decimate the boards, yeah.
It may. Okay, so this is for FYI, yeah.
John, a quick question. If you go back to what you just had up there, it says a 2-year term, and I know that in some cases, council has just made it a 1-year term. Will it always be just a standard 2-year term then?
That's a good question. I think the total would be 8 years of service.
Yeah.
So you might start with a 1-year term to stagger the terms, followed by 2-year terms. So I will ask Tiffany to clarify that, but I think the idea is that you would serve no more than 8 years total in succession.
Okay, thank you, Jonna.
Yes. So the item on the agenda is the review of the design guideline red lines. The design guidelines committee, which is Matt, Bob, Mark, Erica, and myself, have been meeting every couple of weeks to go over 1 or 2 sections of the guidelines to do a cleanup. And again, this is not a rewrite of the guidelines. This is to align our guidelines better with policies that HARC has created over time, or practice that HARC has decided, they prefer, or ways to interpret the guidelines, and then to clean up some of the language. So I don't know if you've all had a chance to go over the sections that I've sent you. If you want to talk about them specifically, if you have any feedback, I don't know, Mark, do you have an idea of how you want to approach the review? The process that I think we will follow is that the committee will continue to review the guidelines, continue to bring the red lines to you at each HARC meeting as we complete them, and ask for your feedback. And then at the end, we will present it to the public and ultimately go to town council. But we'd like to do it kind of ongoing rather than as a big review of the design guidelines at the end with everybody. So
I think there's a couple key changes, and I think maybe if it doesn't become too cumbersome, owe it to ourselves to at least put the red lines up on the screen, or I don't know if you're able, but not read them. And just like we did in our meetings, okay, anybody, section 1, section 2, section 3, or well, I should say each condition or each element real quickly, and just see if anybody's got a comment. If not, we just keep going. And I think this should take 10-15 minutes per chapter, unless we have a lot of dialogue. So
okay,
you can see them.
so we started with the rehabilitation standards, which is the first one in the book. And I'll just scroll through and you can holler if you see something that you want to talk about.
I want to comment that some of the language is boilerplate across sections. So a lot of things, as we go through, we'll pick up something, and then the plan is to apply it across the sections unless there are certain sections where it shouldn't be boilerplate.
Hey, Jonna, on 10, let's see, excuse me, on 11, three new, okay, you got 4 and,
We're on rehabilitation standards number 1.
oh, okay, I was already at 11. I'm sorry. I didn't know.
And this has to do with preserving structure in its
Yeah.
original location. We kind of clarified the policy on when it's appropriate to reposition historic structures. Roofing and roof materials, we included the ability to use composite shingles, which we've seen used on a project or two in town and look almost indistinguishable from wood. Eliminating the use of asphalt shingles, which don't perform well here. Windows, doors. And this is rehabilitation, so this is on historic structures.
Oh, John, sorry, I read the last one, but then I was thinking about it. Sorry, you got a 1 page back. It's about the windows and the replacement of
The
or
glass.
of the glazing.
Mhm.
It's more thermally efficient glazing. So I totally understand the removal of cost effective. Because that's a subjective analysis, but to improve energy efficiency, thermal glass that it's thermal glass is quite a lot thicker, up to 7/8 of an inch.
Yeah.
I guess it's enough to say that that's maybe acceptable, but in a lot of cases that may not work.
You're right. We did talk about that. We could say if
It says May.
It does say May,
So
right?
it's really
And that's what I was thinking about, and that's why you got a whole page ahead of me before I
Is that
said anything. I think it's fine.
adequate?
I think it's fine.
Yep.
I'm just concerned about aligning, the green building code that's being worked on also with, insulation values and the replacement of glass.
We did have that discussion. We thought it would be jumping ahead if we got to the point where we're starting to discourage these historic windows and doors to be sort of salvaged. If the energy code goes and kind of requires us to do something else, I think we'll have to come back.
I think it's probably more important just to note this in the discussions of the green energy code, that some windows maybe need to have an exemption or there needs to be a work through or workaround in the green building code.
there is for historic structures.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I think this isn't, us acknowledging that we need to be sensitive to efficiency, energy efficiency. And a compromise with keeping the historic sashes wherever we can.
I think, yeah, what I gather is the purpose of this is to say, if you've got some really cool wavy single pane glass
Yeah,
that's not thermally efficient, it may be replaced.
it may, unfortunately. I will always encourage people to use storm windows, but
What
people
would be
do
really
not like
cool is
storm
If
windows.
one pane of the double pane was the wavy and then they put a new pane of
Yeah,
E85 behind it. Anyway, okay.
I-
all right.
if there's-
This
if-
is why
yeah.
we don't want this conversation to go till.
you can come to our committee meetings.
This was something that was allowed in practice, but it just wasn't described and here's an option. So that's why I landed it.
Right. This number 4 is under foundations and allowing window wells. And we added street facing facades because we've seen several that are on a corner. And we've also added supporting structures.
You should probably say contributing and supporting, right? Contributing is first. It's the highest. Sorry, minutia.
As you wish.
She aims to please.
I mean, maybe I should.
I think you should.
I'll come make public comment.
I think you should.
Okay, and then number 5, we added, which describes the relationship between the historic foundation and the historic wall above it, and new foundation should not protrude beyond the plane of the historic wall, which has become an issue in certain cases.
So if you're
No,
stone, I get it, you're not stone. You gotta hold your concrete back 6 inches.
I think you and I have even talked about it, yeah. Some clarifying language under additions. I think this is under new additions, new alterations and additions.
19, oh, go ahead, Jonna, go ahead and read those. These are substantive, yep.
Yeah, so the guidelines talk about an addition should be compatible in size and scale with the main building. There's sometimes confusion about that or subordinate, you know, so I think this clarifying language is that additions that are taller than the historic structure are discouraged. However, if it is, then set it back, which is the original language that was there. And then number 5 is adding the preference of a below grade connector first, if possible, and then second preference is a 1-story connector.
Yeah, I think that's good. Hey, I just to share with the board, out of this whole chapter or this whole section, number 4, I was trying to search the words, and then I think Matt helped craft these words with Jonna and Bob and I, that I wanted to say additions should be shorter than historic structures. But then again, we have a lot of 1-story houses where we allow, even if it's subordinate, other width and depth, etc., taller, like 1.5 story in back of a 1-story. Is the board all good with allowing taller? I guess because there are some circumstances where it's onerous to not allow it. And again, I know I mentioned some things from Crested Butte last winter, and I went there a week ago, and I haven't been there in the summer in 20 years. And again, I just saw, you know, the 1.5 story main buildings with subordinate 1-story. I don't mean 6 inches shorter, but 2 and 3 feet shorter than the historic house. But I just wanted to see straw poll. Does anybody think this should be harsher or not?
Mark, let me chime in. There's also the condition where if you have an historic house and then the lot slopes uphill to the back and the addition is built in the back, it's difficult for that to be shorter sometimes than the historic house in the front. So there were multiple conditions why it was difficult to use much stronger language.
Yeah.
And Mark, I'm glad you stepped back from an absolute term. Because, you know, these buildings are experienced in perspective, not in elevation. And it's entirely possible that if a structure was an addition was sensitively placed at the rear, it could be slightly taller and still not visible.
Yeah. Okay. Well, anybody else? I don't want to fall on my sword on this one, but the instinct in me, I couldn't even find an addition in Crested Butte. I couldn't find one that was taller than the historic structure. Of course, there's no hills, no slope.
Flat.
It's flat and it's cold in town.
Yeah, I know.
Mark, I'm with you.
What, Kieran?
We can die on the sword together if you want.
Oh,
Like
okay.
like shish kebab or something, you know, just two
That's
of us on
right.
the sword.
Okay, moving on.
Let's
I've
move on.
only got a few minutes left on my computer battery, so.
Oh, shoot. Okay.
Okay, so that's it for rehab standard.
Yep.
That was easy. So next is historic residential. A couple kind of obvious edits here.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see.
Did you get that intro, under policy, the HARC?
Yes,
the HARC
most recent survey.
I'm talking about that note that the Telluride Land Use Code sets dimensions, but it could vary through the HARC design review process. I don't know if I saw that on the under policy and the note. There was a note
It's
under
at the
policy.
very beginning, the first page.
Yeah.
Oh, I might have missed that.
Okay, keep going. It's
I know
after.
No, it's before this.
Yeah, it's upstream at the beginning further, I think.
Yeah.
I
Actually,
think
the
some
note,
of the call outs aren't in this text version, but
okay.
I'll add it from the book.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it would say can be more restrictive or vary through the HARC design review process is what we added.
Mhm.
To let them know HARC may not grant this height, this width.
Yeah. It was
Okay.
just emphasizing the,
Emphasizing a little bit more that the land use code, HARC doesn't always allow what the land use code allows as far as mass and scale and height. And trying to especially let out of town applicants or people who haven't worked in or done projects in Telluride know that from kind of the get go.
it already says
Okay.
that. It's just saying, hey.
Okay.
Okay, so this is the context, relationship to site context in historic residential. We felt that formerly number 3, which says historic proportions of height, width, and depth are very important to be compatible with the historic mass and scale of the historic residential treatment area, is its own heading. And number 1 and 2 are repeated elsewhere in the HR guidelines.
Yep.
So we can eliminate those.
Yep.
Let's see, this is pedestrian scale number 5. Just again, clarifying some of the language to make it hopefully a little more understandable.
Not based on any project we may or may not have heard this evening, but varied wall plane. So we are after varied wall planes, not necessarily varied setbacks. Okay.
That's the way HARC has interpreted this.
Yep.
Is our understanding.
Then I was perhaps confused by the word setback.
Well, I think people are confused by the word setback and step back or step down. And so we may need to elaborate on that a little more.
There are
But-
some diagrams and photos that we talked about adjusting or eliminating or adding. That's not demonstrated here.
Okay, 7 is views. This one stumped us all on its purpose and intent. Some of it actually. So we proposed deleting number 2. The new number 2 is to maintain views along alleys by keeping buildings small in scale and or set back from the alley. And then we added B, which says views through private property are not insured or protected, which is in fact, not the responsibility of HARC. So we made it explicit.
Sad but true. Sad but true.
I appreciate that. Thank you. However, if views through private property are not insured or protected, why then should a building be positioned so that view corridors are preserved? Whose view corridor should be preserved? If not those that are through private property.
I think B was trying to let sort of neighbors know that if their view gets blocked, that's not necessarily HARC's concern.
Well, I appreciate that, but it undercuts A.
Well, A says considered, and then B says, but not legally required, is the way I interpret it.
So the views that are to be protected are public views through view corridors, the streets and alleys.
Maybe it should
But
say-
your view from your window is not protected.
So maybe it should say public
Yeah.
view corridors are preserved.
I think this is one we I think we all kind of felt like we didn't have perfect language for everyone's. I had a little bit different interpretation of use. So maybe this is one of the things that the whole board focuses on. Sure.
I mean, I like it. It just seems to circle around itself.
And maybe it should say views from streets and alleys specifically, because
I'm good with that, if we wanted that clarified.
I agree.
Unless we could change and make B legal. I must be getting radical.
okay. Good, moving on.
Yep.
This is setbacks.
We have a lot of
We have struggled with defining what the block is when determining the front yard setback on different projects. Sometimes there are sometimes we're given front yard setbacks on the opposite corner of the block because it's the block. So we tried to further identify or define what we mean by the block. And I think what we came up with was the block front, which is that front of that specific block between street and street. That term is defined in the land use code, which is helpful, but I can also add it as another in the guidelines, just to be clear.
Especially where we have different zone districts on either
Yes.
side of the street, though, we've expanded that to more contextual.
Yes.
Did anyone have, I think I sent an email with some diagrams.
Yeah, Matt's
On that.
diagrams were very helpful, I thought.
Yeah. So what HARC is talking about is those properties in relation in the vicinity, in the immediate vicinity or adjacent, or along that block front. Does that sound like what everyone would consider?
Yeah.
reasonable?
I think we might.
Yeah, they,
define a definition or give some more guidance to what immediate vicinity or the neighborhood.
I think an
or
illustration,
illustration. could work
Yeah.
as well.
one of yours, great.
but I wouldn't make that too narrow. I think it implies contextual, along the street in the neighborhood.
I think it needs to give more guidance, but also allow staff the ability to make an interpretation of what they see the context.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's what I think this is maybe too narrow. It defines it as just one side of the street between two. It gives no flexibility if perhaps the opposite side of the street is more pertinent.
It's in the immediate vicinity. Here,
Yeah, but then all property on one side of a street under the LUC definition.
uh,
And it's okay if the guidelines in the LUC are slightly.
Well, look,
We're not out to fix the LUC right now.
it says should not be less than the average of the block front, but it's also talking about adjacent to or in the vicinity. That's, I think, why we thought we had it all covered.
we can
The
add
vicin-
both sides of the street.
Okay, if you
Because
want to
that is
clarify.
the context, yeah.
Yeah, okay,
Agreed.
that's good. That's a good
Okay.
point.
Yeah.
All right.
Matt, can you help? Side yard should match. This is still under setbacks. We eliminated number 2, spacing between buildings should be similar to that seen traditionally. Oh, we decided that a lot of setbacks seen traditionally are 18 inches and
Yeah.
not conducive to fire protection or land use code compliance. So we eliminated number 2. And then under 3, we added patios to the list of things that shouldn't significantly encroach into the front and side yard setbacks, and added the rear as well. Setbacks serve a purpose and shouldn't be used entirely as additional space, living space. Okay. Oops. Building form, this has to do, number 2, with just emphasizing the intent of the language. Building form should step down in scale to the rear of the lot instead of just encouraging. Roof materials, again, discouraging asphalt shingles unless they're already in use. Adding the ability to use composite shingles, and I added solar tiles because we have seen this in other projects that have been, seem to be successful, and again, are more in line with our green building and cap efforts. And this would be for new construction, not for historic structures. We talked about windows and doors and trying to dial in kind of the overall amount of glazing in total. We see a lot of big doors with big glass, which aren't addressed under doors. And so we added an item that was a catch-all for all glazing. Maintain the traditional pattern and size of doors along streets and alleys. And it's funny, but this policy, all doors shall be no more than 2/3 light, exists only in one treatment area. So it's been HARC's policy to enforce it everywhere. So we are adding it to every treatment area.
Very good.
Okay, is that, oh, no.
Yeah. Trash. Yeah.
Trash, encouraging trashing, the use of trash enclosures. And added solar tiles again to a section on solar panels. Okay, that was historic residential. One more.
Last one. Yep.
Last one, which would be residential commercial.
She lost you. She's switching. Yes.
Switch in documents, they're all in different. Okay, residential commercial is the smallest treatment area. It's in 2 different sections of town.
I had, I'm sorry, since I was part of the team, but when I read this again, I had a concern. Go back up to the top 3
Okay.
paragraphs.
Yep.
We go into detail about the one treatment area, and it's not till the middle of the 3rd paragraph that we mention the 2nd section. So I was wondering if we took, it said the first section is located north of Main Street, blah, 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 and then go the other section, the 2nd section located along South Oak, has a lot of this, it's referring to just that area in these next 2 paragraphs.
So reference the second area in the first paragraph.
Yeah, I mean, just so, because you're talking about 2, just say, these are the 2,
Yeah. Okay.
that kind of thing. I think you know what to do. I think it's,
Okay. Can I add that later?
yeah, don't worry
Okay,
about
I made us a note.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a good point, Bob. Okay, we eliminated references to the new gondola. And kind of outdated language.
And my only other note is
We
just
may have
like-
a new gondola soon, so maybe we should leave it in there. I don't know.
Yeah, well, yeah, that new gondola. And the only other note is to repeat what we had in the note to previous couple sections. May vary through the HARC review process
Yes.
rather than just design. Okay.
Correct.
So we're more consistent. All right.
Okay. This change, all of this language in red is existing under pedestrian scale, but it's located under items A and B and felt more like it's part of the policy rather than specifically those bullet items. So we just
Yep.
relocated it. Yeah, so here it is, repeated
B.
again, just eliminated.
B1. Okay,
Mhm.
yeah, there you go. Changes in wall plane. Okay, got it.
To provide visual interest, you can do all of these things, including change wall planes.
I think there's some other language that we used before that might apply to
I-
E1. We said step down in scale to the street and reduce.
To the street,
Yeah, and then we
yeah.
got rid of edge.
I think this section does create some confusion because when people slap a deck on the front of an otherwise vertical wall plane, they, according to this, they've met the guideline by using an element such as a deck. I put a deck on it. I meet the guideline. I'm stepping down. But that's not what we've taken this to mean,
Yeah.
at least while I've been on HARC.
Should we eliminate decks and porches?
Well, they
Or-
they can be elements and they can help, but I think
And not rendered and or just eliminate
This is
or.
just describing some ways you can do it. It's not saying do this.
no, I understand, but I'm glad, well, that's what I'm saying. I'm glad we're changing, and I don't even think we have to say and or. Well,
How, could I throw something under? What if you put, step down the street using elements such as changes in wall plane, then decks, bays, and balconies?
Hmm.
well,
the
because
wall
right, because that's our preferred method.
Changing the order, that would make sense.
I'm good.
So decks would be the last.
Do we want to say and the other things to Stacy's point? That
No.
it is planes
Changing wall planes.
and any of these others or?
Well, it should probably, well,
I don't think.
look,
so
I don't
you
want
say-
to, I don't want to.
You don't want or on there.
I don't want to devolve down into grammar school, but if we're saying changes in wall planes, it should then be additions of base, balconies, and decks. Like we're using a descriptor.
Is that good, how I've changed it?
I think, yeah, I think it's fine for now. Yeah,
Okay. Okay.
base, balconies, decks, and port. Yeah.
These are the
Same
same.
changes to views as previously mentioned.
Secondary rules. I mean, yeah, I know.
We've eliminated all of item 14 because there are no steep slopes in this treatment area.
Who knew?
That's okay.
I thought we had too much public.
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah.
Let's see, we eliminated things that just didn't seem to make sense. I think this probably needs to be worked on again, like the previous section with a little more
Yeah.
clarifying language.
Vicinity, you mean?
I think it's related to that, just how we're describing what the local context is.
Yeah.
She's got it.
Okay.
Let's see, guidelines number 20, policy 22 was duplicated. There were two service area guideline sections, so we've combined
Yeah.
22 with 38.
Good.
The other thing I'll mention is that we're going to reorganize the guidelines in each section to make the most important guidelines first. Context, mass and scale,
I
details.
found that odd
everything
that
else.
mass and scale is what, 22nd or something?
Yes,
Yeah.
right.
Somewhere in there, lost in there, yeah.
Again, appropriate roofing materials. What was that? Glazing, general glazing. Doors should be no more than 2/3 light. Service areas, this is combining number 22 with 38 and including some of the language from that.
Hey, John, on 33 windows, 33A, I missed it. Oh, the overall glazing doors should also be considered to be traditional, right? Just like you had the last chapter.
It's item G right here.
Yeah, overall. Okay, I see it now. Thanks.
Okay. And the 2/3 light doors. Service areas, again, this is a strange treatment area because it's residential and commercial, so we've broken it out by residential and commercial separately since there are different expectations for those uses. And that is it.
We're almost 30% done. Thank you all, and thanks for adding some other comments tonight.
Yeah. Great feedback.
Our next meeting.
You guys crushed it. I would just make your meetings longer.
We're making our
We
meetings
are.
longer, actually.
I know. You want me to do this all the time?
Okay, well, with all this, we will
Thank you.
adjourn then at 11:05 Eastern, 9:05 your time.
Yikes, that's a long one.
8:05 my time.
Okay.
Okay.